So you can cheat, right? Like, I mean, you can be
Yeah.
disloyal. So, and you're gonna be deceiving one person at best. The other one still knows, right? So that's the notion that's really important to keep in mind. And I started to maybe define God as conscience,
Hmm.
but
Welcome to Rebuilding the Village, a podcast that seeks to explore the causes of modern problems by examining the roots of our metaphorical village through the systems and structures in society that may have been disrupted in the technological and industrial era that we inhabit. Thank you for joining me today.
This concept of, and I'm still kind of fleshing it out. I'm still trying to like put it into the form of the podcast, but the village essentially became like this idea that evolved around looking at my own life and asking myself, like, why am I not where I thought I would be right now? And then when I started talking to other people, asking other people around me, realizing
yeah.
that a lot of people are in the same category. And it's not just me. It's almost like a systemic problem across most of society. A lot of young men, a lot of young women are basically just kind of coasting along and kind of being swayed by the whims of the moment and questioning what were the things that kept us on track prior to today's day and age. What were the things that got you from point A to point B in your life in some relatively sequential process? Like, generally speaking, historically, you might say, all right, when you're young, you're with your family, around a certain age, you kind of grow up, you start adopting some responsibility from the family, and then eventually maybe you pick up a trade, you're part of the community, you eventually get old enough, they find you a spouse, you find a spouse, you end up having a family, the whole thing just repeats itself. And things like homelessness, I guess, for a good example, is a question of like, what were the systems that kind of kept those numbers low in the first place that are no longer in place today? And discouraging people from sleeping in certain places probably isn't solving the problem of why are they homeless in the first place.
When you say you're not where you want to be, for example, what do you mean specifically?
So I actually thought about this and I realized I didn't even know where I wanted to be in the first place until I started thinking about it. And I'm 34 and going to be 35 in about 2 weeks, single, not married, renting an apartment, no kids yet, luckily, but maybe when I'm married, it'll be nice to have some family of my own. I think there's a certain impression growing up, especially nowadays for a lot of young people, that you just have, like, things are just going to play out the way they used to, just by and if you try to articulate what it means to have like a happy, successful life, you kind of have to start drilling down to think about what kind of life. Okay, like you could say just concept, you could drill it down to the basics and start building on top of that. What kind of life do you want to have? Okay, well, I want to be happy and successful. What does that mean? Well, maybe, I want to have a family and kids and a career and things like that. Okay, so how do you get that? Well, you have to put yourself together. You have to take care of yourself. You have to go out and find a career and build a job and learn to be articulate, and then start socializing and talking to people, and then start dating around. And when you're dating around, step into something kind of like a long-term relationship. And then from there, what's the next step after step after step after step? And a lot of guys my age I've seen, and a lot of younger, I think there was some break in the process there. There was some kind of disruption in the usual trends that would have got you there almost just by living your life normally. Because everyone around you was kind of like the village was kind of doing. It was kind of pressuring you in that direction indirectly without you thinking about it.
Yeah.
So like by a certain age, like your parents are like, all right, just go out and get a job. I don't care what it is, just get a job doing something. So you can start learning work ethic and start working skill, the value of a dollar. And then you're going to start saving money and putting it towards maybe like a college education or some kind of degree. You're going to go out and become an apprentice of some sort. And then on the way, maybe you're just going to start hanging out with your friends and going to a bar. You bump into a nice, pretty girl, or good looking guy. And all of a sudden you start talking. And then everyone around you is getting married. So you're eventually going to get married too. Everyone around you is having kids. You want to marry kids too. And then the question being like, why are the divorce rates skyrocketing? Why are the marriage rates plummeting? Why is the dating scene a complete disaster? Why is there pickup artists? There's the whole industry. The red pill movement is cranking along pretty heavily. Inflation is out of control. People can't afford jack shit anymore. Social media is rotting people's brains, and it's starting to cause these crazy disruptions in that usual process that we would have had before that is no longer there. And wondering what were guiding forces in that village, so to speak, that were there that we didn't even know about, that on average, kept us as a species progressing technologically at a healthy pace into the future. That is no longer there, that we're now having to learn about. Like a good example of this is a lot of the pushback around things like evolutionary biology, especially in the colleges and whatnot. And it used to be things like men are attracted to women or women are attracted to men. For what reasons? We don't know. They just are. It just works. We don't know. And then now you're starting to see this like massive disruption in dating trends. And a big part of that is probably due to globalization and like dating apps and social media that is kind of disrupting what used to be a relatively normal, healthy process. So for example, more often than not, if you go back, rewind the clock like 50 to 70, 100 years ago, 99% of the time, if you got married with somebody, it was somebody within proximity of you. It's somebody you knew through your family, somebody you knew through your friends, you belong to a church or some kind of religious group. You were in proximity to them, and the family knew them, and you knew them. And that became something of a healthy vetting process where you don't know if this is a good guy or a good girl, but the people around you know them. So that kind of helps you push in the direction of, okay, this kind of helps reduce the time it would take to figure out if this is a healthy prospective possible mate for me. On top of that, you're just in the same activities together. You're getting that proximity attraction. You're getting to see them, observe them. And eventually, just like, yeah, you know what? Let's go on a date. Oh, you know what? We have a similar interest. We're in similar interests because we do similar activities together because we're around each other enough. I mean, maybe we grew up in the same neighborhood. We know each other. Our families know each other. The ease with which it's going to be to like then turn that into a long-term relationship is much easier. Something like dating apps completely breaks that model because now you're competing with every other man within like a 200-mile radius, no matter who they are, where they are. And B, you're not going through those usual trends or things you would have normally done to vet somebody out. Now the vetting process is automated through a filtering process. And it's like if you ask somebody in real life, it's like, what do you think of the guy that you've been kind of like keeping an eye on, who's at the local job you have or the church you have, or whatever you belong to? You know this friend, what do you think of him? Oh, he's a nice guy, he's sweet. I've seen him interact. He's good with his parents. He's good with kids. He's okay. He's a good guy. If he was on a dating app and he said like, well, how tall is he? Well, he's 5'11", but he's not 6 foot. Not good enough for me. Has to be 6 foot. Or not like 1 inch difference is going to make the world a bit like 1 inch difference in the filtering process of dating app. Suddenly you're not even going to talk to this guy. When in reality, he might be a fantastic prospective partner for you.
Well, I think we're lacking the simplification of a lot of these processes. So everything
Yeah.
is so complex and we have sensory overload. So when it comes to dating sites, I mean, the dating app burnout is real because when you have such a huge variety of people to choose from, you either go down to micro characteristics that you want them to have, or you just get burned out, which is what I did basically. So you have these choices of people, and then you talk to that person, and you talk to that person, and all of a sudden you just say, you know what? To hell with this shit. I'm like, and then you ghost everyone because who wants to talk to these many people in a day? Is sensory overload when it comes to everything. And I think that 30, funny enough, is the age where you really sit down and you see that your dreams in your 20s didn't come true. So you sit down and you say, oh, so I guess this is not going to happen for me. And then you kind of start developing a plan. Okay, so what is going to happen for me? And I recently had a anniversary with my people from high school, and we're all about 30. No one knows what they're doing. No one. Not the good students, not the bad students. No
Yeah.
one knows what the hell is going on. So,
Yeah.
but I think that on the other side, me, for example, I can't really follow the traditional line because unfortunately, that's not me. So I have to figure out my plan in regards to everything, which is better than not doing that, because I think that you can try a lot of things and they fail, and then you go to then you try something else, whatever, but the biggest failure is achieving something that you thought and then people thought is going to make you happy and bring joy to your life and bring you purpose, only to find out that that's not the case. I mean, that must be one hell of an afternoon. So I came to
Yeah.
an acceptance that not having the pace that I thought I was going to have, not being where I thought I was going to be, is fine, because as long as I'm open and I'm listening to God, for lack of a better expression, right?
Yeah.
I'm open to my intuition and my consciousness speaking to me. I'm going to be just fine. I mean, sometimes you want to force something, you want to get that job. But if
Mhm.
you just open your mind, that you might figure out, well, the reason why I didn't get that job is because I was supposed to start a business. I was supposed to be a CEO,
Mhm.
right? Not a manager. So I think that
Yeah,
just accepting that that's how it is. It's a complex world and it has pros and cons. You just have to be open. I mean, acceptance and openness, man, that's the best you've got, I believe.
absolutely. But what's interesting in that is I think there's this point that I've had this discussion a couple times with people in my life, and I think what's interesting to see, and one of the bigger problems we have today is that there was a good quote I heard. It was like, you have to ask yourself not what do you want, you have to ask yourself what do you want to want. And in
Yeah.
that frame of reference, you're really asking yourself, like, what kind of environment should I be spending time and energy into creating to then push me intrinsically, naturally in that direction in the first place? Like, for example, for me, I know for the longest time, I had no interest in marriage or kids whatsoever. Really did. And even to the point that like little kids just annoyed me. It's just like, ah, no, they're annoying. They're screechy. They whine. They cry. They crap their pants. I don't want to deal with this. This is annoying. And that was kind of ongoing for a long time. And it was almost like there was times it was like a physiological, almost, I'm gonna say a fear, but like a repulsion. Like when I had like my mating cousin come up to like want to play it and be like, I'm gonna go get something back, sorry. I just walk away. And I really had to sit down and think about it and look into it and start really doing some research and realize like, well, I think it was a combination of I had a little bit of a hectic childhood. Wasn't the worst, but it wasn't the best. And at the same time, I had a lot of friends who were also just like, "Yeah, we don't want kids. Kids are dumb. Kids are stupid. Just enjoy your life, party your ass off, all this stuff." And only just to only realize later on, like, "Oh, you'll be happier when you chase your career, when you get more money, when you get this." And I actually, with my job, I did like kind of come on a bit of like a financial windfall in my direction. And when I had the money, I bought a new car. I went on vacation. And I was just like, I'm still miserable. What the hell? I was told this was going to be awesome. This is going to
Yep.
be great. And it turns out like, wow, this is not as good as I thought it was going to be. And in that capacity, I think what we're seeing today is this really interesting phenomenon and arguably very dangerous. It's just this term I remember reading in a book. The book is called "The Case Against the Sexual Revolution" by a woman named Louise Perry. Really good book. And she's kind of like a more or less like a reformed feminist, we'll say. Like she's like hardcore, and now she kind of like really dug deep into the research and ideas behind it. And she mentioned this topic, this idea called limbic capitalism. And the
Okay.
idea is that we've got systems and structures in society today that are specifically targeting the back of your brain for sales purposes. A good example of this is like pornography. Like historically, realistically, on like a social society level, what the village did was like the male sex drive, in essence, was biologically designed to make you want to outcompete every other guy out there, and absolutely to the benefit of women because you want the best possible mate you can get. So women would come along and say jump, and guys would say how high, please let me know. I will do whatever you want. And we use that energy to build the world, to become technologically innovative, and to make sure we were capable and strong and keeping the village and everything in good structure. And now you take that exact same energy and you funnel it into something like pornography. And suddenly the urge to go out and try to put yourself together as a guy and become, work out and get in good shape and learn how to take a shower and become articulate and all this stuff is now just completely gone, because the energy would have been where it's just like, all I could think about is, hot girls. How do I get them? Well, become educated, work on your career, work out, like learn how to social articulate. Biggest one, learn how to control your emotions expressively around other people. And you'd be surprised how quickly women will come up to you. But now you can take all that and just you funnel the energy in the wrong direction, and it's not utilized in a productive manner, to the point now you've got guys who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, spending all their days and nights playing Call of Duty, smoking weed in their basement. And people are judging these guys, kind of saying like, well, why don't you just go out and do something? It's like, because the back of my brain is telling me I want this. Option A is watch some porn. Option B is go out and make something of yourself and work a hard career, and like sublimate the feeling for a long time and struggle and be frustrated and eventually find success. And option B is better in the long run, but in terms of what your brain is going to look for in terms of like cost effectiveness versus like how much energy expended versus getting the satisfaction and the reward, pornography is super quick. It's super short.
Yep.
Same thing
Yeah.
with things like junk food and not exercising. It's like, yeah, you're not going to want to feel like doing it, but it's better for you in the long run if you do it. But if nobody around you is teaching you the importance of not succumbing to your baser monkey brain instincts, you're just going to keep doing it. And then it becomes a multi-billion-dollar industry. In the same case of things like weight loss or any kind of like, junk food eating and things like that, or not wanting to work or not wanting to do things. I don't blame people entirely for having this like lack of interest, because you need to really have a structure in place to teach them that you're not born with a built-in capacity to control your emotions or your impulses. You have to learn it. It's a discipline, it's a learning process to learn that. The way I see it is like, it's not just you in there. There's multiple not multiple personality disorder, but like multiple
Usually.
parts of yourself that are competing for space. It's like there's a part of me that wakes up that's hungry, part of me wakes up that wants to go do stuff. But like when I wake up in the morning, like I simultaneously want to stay in bed and go to the gym at the same time. And it's confusing. It's like I should go and work out, but goddamn, this bed is really comfy. I'm really hungry.
Yeah.
I should eat Burger King, or I should have a salad. Yeah, both of those sound like good ideas. Like, can I get the flavor of the Burger King with the benefit of the salad? Can I is there some way to, and recognizing that when you have an impulse or a feeling or an idea, it doesn't automatically mean you should be listening to it, but you need people around to teach you, this is what you're feeling, this is what you're doing, this is part of your brain. It's not your fault for feeling a feeling, but you need to learn to control it. And if you don't teach people to control it, they're going to eventually, I'm suspect myself for a long time that you're going to fall to your basic impulses, unless the village and the structure of society around you is helping keeping you propped up above those impulses.
Well, I mean, to me, the question is, I'm antisocial, asocial anyway, so I don't really have a good social circle. But how does someone start building that village around them? You know what I mean? How do you start? I mean, even that is a big step, because I know that in order for me to make a friend, I need to go out and meet people, because without meeting people, I can't really make a friend, and that I need to maintain that friendship. But for some reason, it's so hard for me to step out of this zone that I'm in, because first of all, there's things that I'm interested in that not a lot of people are, and especially a combination of things that I'm interested in. Not a lot of people are. And the things that I want to talk about, it's really hard to find people to talk about these things with. And I think that I'm not the only one with that problem. Why can't we
Absolutely.
seem to find each other? Like, where are these people? I know they're out there, but where? I just have problems with building this social circle. Because for now, like the only people in my social circle are my mom, my stepdad, a little bit my grandma, and then that's it.
I don't think that's super far off the mark, though, for most people who are past a certain age. But I think that historically what would happen is you were friends with all the kids in the neighborhood, all the kids in the kindergarten and the middle school and the high school growing up. And then you kind of slowly start to consolidate down to a smaller and smaller circle, but it's tighter and tighter bonds with those same people. But in terms of what do you do to start building the circles again, I guess you ask yourself, what are your interests, and where can you find people who also have similar interests? Like if you hear you say you're antisocial, but at the same time you're doing a lot of podcasting, talking to complete strangers and long form conversations about complex topics on the internet. So I wouldn't say you're antisocial. It sounds like you're just. I've heard this
I haven't
before.
found the right people. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard this before. It's like I think it's a quote from Matt Walsh, and he basically says like introverts. We don't. It's not that we don't like talking. It's that we can't stand insincere conversation. I personally can't stand like, how's the weather? Did you watch the sports game the other day? Did you see that new thing on Netflix? I'm just like, just kill me now, please. Just like, and I can't do this. This is so boring. I know whenever I talk to people, I'm unfortunate. My profession right now, I'm doing massage therapy. I basically get to talk to people one-on-one for a full hour while working on them. And they're basically half naked, if not fully naked, on a table covered up by sheets. They're very vulnerable about everything going on in their lives. They'll tell me everything, their marriage, their sex life, their kids, their work, like what's going on. But at the same time, when you start to talk to enough people, you start to realize like people sometimes are not even honest with us. Like they won't even realize that they're telling themselves a story to try to reinforce the story because they're too afraid of admitting the truth to what's actually going on, because there's a certain amount of energy required to almost grieve the truth or grieve the fact that your story is not the same what it could be. The socializing thing is that figuring out like what your hobbies are where you can connect with people on those particular hobbies, and just really practicing. I think practicing is a really tough thing to do, especially nowadays. Especially nowadays because vulnerability is so attacked by our society across the board.
Well, I mean, I see a lot of people. Okay, so Friedrich Nietzsche actually said that you could tell a
Mhm.
lot about a person's character by how much truth they can tolerate. And
I
I
like
know
that. Yeah.
people who have been lying to themselves for years now. These people are
Yeah.
not in a good place. And I also know people who have been lying to other people as well for a very long time. And let me tell you, hell is a real place on earth. So, not that long ago, I decided to not lie anymore.
Hmm.
And it's been really tough because, man, these little white lies, I was so used to them that my automatic impulsive response to something was to lie automatically. You know,
Hmm.
like I could be talking to you about how important it is to tell the truth. And then at the same time, I'm picking up my phone and I'm telling someone, okay, I'll be there in 10 minutes. I'm not even leaving the house, and just without thinking about it.
Yes.
I would
Yes.
lie straight off the bat. So now every time something like that happens in a situation where I would usually use a white lie, I really need to consciously think about it and then not lie, right? So and I just started doing that. Well, not really. I've been doing it now for a while, and it's liberating. I cannot
Hmm.
explain to you the freedom that I have.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think that the Bible in one sense says become like a child, and I think that's really correlated to this because you kind of do feel like a child. And and all the lies that you tell lie on a fundamental lie, which is you need to manipulate reality because
Mm.
there is no fundamental plan for you in life. So you need to manipulate it and you need to control it. But that's not true. That's a lie. But that's why you lie. So I think that telling the truth, it's really, man, I mean, it's the reason why narcissism, it doesn't seem to be treatable because these people cannot start telling the truth.
It
How are
is.
you
It
going to
is
treat an
treatable from what I
addiction or a
understand.
disorder if you're dishonest?
From what I understand, it is treatable. It's just it takes a lot of practice and a lot of therapy, and you can't actually work it through. But like you said, I think that ties into what I sort of said earlier, which is that like it's not just you in here; it's multiple personalities competing for space. There's a really good book
Mhm.
by a guy named Jonathan Haidt called "The Righteous Mind," and
Yeah.
the book basically talks about why people have political beliefs in certain directions, conservative versus liberal, and how it pertains to personality, but also from a very broad evolutionary perspective as to why people will do certain things and act a certain way in certain settings as almost like old byproducts of our monkey stories, for lack of better words. And one thing he talks about in particular is the idea of how like conforming to the group in some capacity was an evolutionary survival strategy. Even if you didn't agree with
Mhm.
them, it's like if you're all alone by yourself, you see a group of wandering people and they said, oh, we're all, we're Orthodox Christians. And you're like, oh, I'm actually, like Southern Baptist. Oh, I'm Orthodox now. How are you doing? My name is Mike. Let's be Orthodox together because I need to be with you guys, right? I need to survive. And there is this kind of, he mentioned this one little scenario in the book. It was really funny. He was talking about how his wife was getting fed up with him for not doing the dishes. I think he would leave the dishes in the sink and not wash it. And in reality, he was just being lazy for like the 15th time. And his wife was like, I've told you so many times to do the dishes. And he said like, oh, I was actually just really busy. I was going to get to it in a second. I said to do something. And she was like, okay, I'm sorry, my bad. And he was like, that was a total lie. That lie came into existence and out my mouth faster than I could even recognize that I was lying in the first place.
Yep.
And how it was actually like circuitry in your brain. It's designed to basically try and keep the peace socially in the moment for the sake of maintaining status amongst other people, for the sake of your own survival. But the problem then becomes is that if that you start lying to yourself enough and you start believing it, but it doesn't really like line up, like you said, like it's painful. It's like physiologically difficult to accept the truth at times because it doesn't match up with the reality that your brain is creating in the moment. But it
Yeah.
becomes problematic because it compounds in the wrong direction over a long enough period of time. You keep lying over and over again. It becomes more and more difficult to remember who you lied to about what and like what things. And then after a while, people start noticing trends in your behavior. And it's just like, she always says she'll be there in 10 minutes and it's always 30 minutes later every time. What the hell's going on? So now she's not telling the truth about that. What else is she lying about? And all of a sudden you start to like dissolve social bonds. And now people know they just can't believe you. They can't trust you because your behavior is not matching your words. But at the same
Right.
time, your body, it's not, I don't think it's like people doing it malicious. Like as far as like evil maliciousness goes, I think across the entire population of the world, I would gather there's probably like half a 0.1% of people who are genuinely, truly like evil, malicious, demonic beings. And then the other 99.9% of people who are just like, I just don't want to get fired from my job. Like, I don't believe what we're doing, but I don't want to get fired. I don't want to piss off my friends. I don't want to like cause an upset at the social circle at the church. Like, because I don't know how they're going to respond to it. So it's easier to just kind of go along with it rather than be honest and open about it and face the backlash in the process. Because there is something about like a personal and some societal detoxification process you go through. And I think you were talking about, I was watching the Tammy Peterson interview. I know with Jordan Peterson, he was a mental figure in my life to turn my life around. It fixed a lot of issues I was going through. But seeing a lot of the protests and pushback he gets, and I think a lot of it is like he's telling the truth, but the people around him are having to be detoxed from their own lives and themselves, and they're fighting that detoxification process. It's like almost like a collective social withdrawal that they're trying to go
Yeah,
through. And
well,
it's
if you're not going to be engaging in lies of omission, which is what people are doing in that case, and sometimes fair enough because maybe you have 4 kids to feed at home, you cannot afford to tell the truth, but you're going to be the one detoxicating the society. And the same thing happened to Paul Rossi, who had to resign because he wasn't okay with the critical race theory. But if you look at all these people, I mean, look at where Jordan is right now.
Mhm.
He's killing it. I mean, his life is an adventure.
Yeah.
He's worldwide known. So I think that you have to start detoxificating the society with some fundamental trust and faith in mind that
Mhm.
I believe in the path of truth so much that I'm willing to go through all this chaos, all that is going to happen with the faith that something better is going to come out of it. And I think
Mhm.
and I see that in my life, man, I've failed spectacularly throughout my life, and every time I failed, something better came out of it. So
Mhm.
I lost all the assets, then I went into real estate. That was better. I quit real estate and I got into podcasting. This is way better. So every time I failed, so I came to a conclusion that when something seemingly horrible happens, shit, I might as
Yeah.
well start celebrating. So if I wanted to be more successful, maybe I should fail more in the process.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it's believing that the path of your genuinity is the best path possible. And guess
Mhm.
what? That's pretty freaking hard to believe because
Yeah.
you just don't have the intelligence and that way of thinking on that macro level, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I had and it's, I think part of this is recognizing that the best path forward is like, yeah, it's being truthful, it's being honest with yourself, but also recognizing that like self inner work, don't beat yourself up for having certain behaviors that were there because beyond your
Mm-hmm.
own control, and recognizing the kind of
Mm-hmm.
environment. So like a good example of this for me was like, I think it was like 3 weeks or a month ago, I was lying in bed and I usually charge my phone in my kitchen. I don't keep it in my bedroom anymore because it's too tempting to look at it in the middle of the night. And I was lying in bed, it was like 10 o'clock, and out of nowhere, just a random question popped into my head. And I was like, I'm curious what the answer is. I bet you Google could answer this question. Is it really that important to answer right now? Not really. But you know what? I'm just curious. So I got up, I got my phone, opened up Google. What's the answer to this question? And it popped up in like a YouTube video. And I was like, oh, cool, YouTube video. All of a sudden, another YouTube video. And another YouTube video. All of a sudden, I'm
Oh, yeah.
doom scrolling till 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm just like, what the F? Where'd the time go? And so I took my phone and put it under my pillow. And I was like, okay, ignore it, go to sleep. And I remember this feeling, my body was like, if I move my hand 3 inches to the right, I can grab my phone right now and keep looking. And I was like, I got mad for a second. I was like, what is wrong with me? Why can't I just go to sleep and ignore the phone? And then I stopped myself and I said, like, okay, this device is, people have spent hundreds of billions of dollars to make this the most addictive piece of technology on the planet. It's not my fault if I have trouble overcoming that feeling, because they're literally targeting parts of my brain that have an override function on my logical thinking.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like it's targeting like that impulsiveness. And in that capacity, it's like, it's almost like saying, we're not going to blame you if you relapse into drinking if they build a liquor store right next to your house, because it's in proximity in a way. Like, so recognizing that you have to voluntarily keep distance. If you're a recovering alcoholic, you're not allowed to go to bars anymore. That's just your life now. That's totally fine. If you're trying to be honest about a particular thing, whatever it may be, and just you have to recognize that there are parts of you that are going to try to push their influence into your thinking, into your logical thinking, depending on your circumstances, your environment, and things like that. And part of that might be telling lies to gain short-term benefits, even at the expense of your own honesty within yourself, but then having enough foresight into the future to recognize that listening to these little impulses is only going to compound in the wrong direction. For me, for example, actually, as far as the Petersons go, I am on the carnivore diet too, and it's like literally changed my life. It's been fantastic for me. Even to this day, though, I go walk into the supermarket and I'm just like, oh my God, those cookies look so tasty. Holy crap. Oh, candy over there. I really want some candy. And thinking it's been like 4 or 5 years now I've been doing bacon, eggs, and red meat and water. And I still feel amazing. My energy is super consistent. I had depression and anxiety that literally cleared away within a matter of 2 weeks. I've lost a ton of weight. I feel great. And yet still that little demon on my shoulder is still just like, yeah, but wouldn't cookies sound good right now? It's almost like it's always there, and you have to constantly. It's almost, I wouldn't say it's a constant battle, but you whittle it down smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, but you never fully get rid of it. So you have to just be honest and accepting the fact that I know I have a capacity for lying or for trying to tell little white lies or not telling the truth, and there's an urge to do it because it's easier in the moment than the internal emotional response I know I'm going to get. But in the long run, I get more benefit out of telling the truth rather than succumb into the temptation for little white lies along the way.
Yeah, man, you gotta cut yourself some slack for real because you would to your best friend. So, for example, I had migraine a little while ago, and in my head, I was thinking, "Gosh, this is so pathetic. I can't really do anything today. Why do I have to have this bullshit?" And I thought about it for a while. I said, "Man, if I had a good friend and she had a migraine, I would have never told her that. That's so mean." I mean, the self-talk is the most important talk you're ever gonna have. So you need to really watch what you're thinking
Mm-hmm.
and what you're telling yourself, right? And also you need to realize that it may be your responsibility, but that doesn't mean it's your fault. So on my
That's
psychedelic
exactly
trip, my
it.
very first psychedelic trip, I started looking at my mistakes as a parent would look at his child's mistakes. You
Mm-hmm.
should not do that, but be kind to yourself. Be rational when you're criticizing yourself or something, right? And yeah, well, what you need to keep in mind is that all the sounds that are coming out of your phone have already been tested. Like this is the sound that
Oh
makes
yeah,
you
yeah.
more likely to pick up the phone. It's been tested neurologically, neuromarketing, they've done the job and they've done it great. And also, when people come out of the, let's say, addiction therapies, the wrong thing to do is usually more convenient than the right thing, because at your corner store you have your liquor, you have your buddies waiting for you outside. You know how they say that while you're in recovery your addiction is at the parking lot doing push-ups? That's real. And then the good decision for you is usually very hard to obtain, right? So that
Yeah.
therapy you have to apply and then you have to wait and then you have to pay. So it's very inconvenient. So I'm really supporting the nonprofit organization that make things convenient, even for prisoners coming out of prison, for example, that they have someone to talk to on a daily basis, right? Not just their criminal buddies, because prison, and I was talking to like a prisoner who killed a person and he was in maximum security for like 30 years or whatever. He said that, prison is a bank robbing school, actually. I was
Yeah.
like, what? He said, yeah, it really prepares you to become a better criminal. And then when you step outside, first of all, you cannot get a job. So that's probably going to be a bummer. And then everyone is just waiting for you to re-enter with new knowledge. So
Yeah.
what's the convenient path? Even if the good thing was more convenient than the bad thing, you would already be in a dilemma. Like you would already have problems. But
Mm-hmm.
now it's like it's everything goes totally against you. So you need to keep that in mind. It's possible, but you need to be mentally tough, you know.
Yeah, and I think in that what I was saying before was that not so much. I used to beat myself up for having temptations and having the urge to look at the phone and whatnot, but now I've
Uh,
gotten to a point. I tell other people the same thing, which is that don't attack yourself for being human. These are normal. This is part of the software, part of the hardware of being a human being, part of your brain. You didn't ask to have temptation, but the best thing you could do is be honest that it's there in the first place, and then try to create circumstances around you. So it's like, we're not going to blame you for having temptations of drink again if a liquor store opens up next door, but we will encourage you to try to move or get them to close it down or something like that. Like, so be honest and say, like, I'm having that temptation right now. I need to do something to try to like get it to calm down or create an environment. Like, so for me, with charging my phone in my kitchen now at night, I did that because for a long time I could not get to quality sleep because I kept having this urge to pick up my phone every time it vibrated. And even now with the phone, what I do is I've basically deleted 90% of the apps on my phone that weren't like absolutely critical and crucial for my day-to-day function. And I've also turned off 90% of the notifications with the exception of like a phone call, an emergency phone call. And it took me a couple of weeks to like stop just impulsively checking it randomly just to see if something was interesting on there. And then initially it was like, like I felt like I was important because I was getting text messages from Discord from my friends and just random stuff or random news. Like, because you think part of you feels like you're important because it's like, oh, well, they're sending this text to me. This message is important to me. I must be important. And then when you cut all that out, all of a sudden you're just like, it's got a little quiet here now. But then after a while, you kind of realize like, now I can actually focus on what's really important to me because I'm not constantly being pulled over every 5 seconds from that thing. And in the case of the prisoner and like the recovery process, it's like, this is the idea of like that group, the village thing was like, I think people have a certain feeling of individualism, especially in the West. I think there's a certain sense of like stoic individualism that's required of you where you're like, well, you should have been able to do everything by yourself. You should be able to build a business by yourself and become a millionaire by yourself and do all this stuff by yourself. When historically, like, we are naturally social creatures. A lot of what we do as like one thing for example, is like emotional co-regulation is very poorly understood nowadays. And the idea that like most things in life if you can do by yourself, but certain things you need another human being in order to help you with. There's nothing wrong with that. So it's like having, in case of recovering addiction, having people in your life that are holding you accountable to make sure you don't succumb to those feelings and not beating yourself up because, I still want to drink. I still want to do drugs. I still want to do this. I'm still craving pornography, whatever it is. But telling people around you, like, listen, this is what I'm going through right now. I'm going to do my best, but once in a while I might have a temptation. I'm asking you to just keep an eye on me. And if you see something, say something. And I might fight you about it. I might disagree with you. I might try to bullshit my way around it. But in reality, that's part of the vulnerability thing we talked about earlier, which is the idea that like you need to be vulnerable and you need to be honest with yourself to admit that sometimes these temptations are bigger than you, but they can be kept under control through friends and family and people in your life. And be vulnerable enough to admit to somebody else that you're not strong enough to single-handedly take on this demon. But it's okay. It's okay to admit that like that you might need people around you to help you out, just like they're going to help you. And we're all part of a collective, a group. And there is no such thing as like the lone wolf in traditional society. It's not a healthy way to live.
Yeah. Well, I mean, sometimes it's really humiliating how low you have to go and to start rebuilding everything that you should have built before. Well, what I'm saying here is, for example, and I can correlate that to the truth that we're talking about before. Oftentimes, when people come out of the addiction treatments, first of all, you have no one to tell because for many years you've been deceiving people into thinking that you're not even addicted. So people may not even know. And then to people who you do tell, maybe you've been telling lies for such a long time that they don't even believe you. And then the third is maybe you don't even believe yourself because how are you going to keep word with someone else and have boundaries with someone else when you can't even keep the word to yourself? You know what I mean? Because for years you've been telling yourself, tomorrow is, today is the last time I drink. This is the last drink. And then tomorrow you witness yourself picking up a drink. And then you can tell yourself, man, you're such a liar. That wasn't true. You know, that wasn't true. And I think this is how you build your confidence or not confidence. It's by being witness to all the actions that you did. I think that's just doing something, just do it beats 100 affirmations said to your mirror in the morning, right? So I think it's a very complex thing, and for a lot of people that's gonna mean starting from the bottom, man, starting from bottom.
Yeah. And there's a certain, that's like that humility and humbleness, and that's what I personally see in people in like this like detoxification process is like like the witness thing you mentioned, I think this is so interesting. This is like where the idea of like confession came from in certain churches, and like the idea if you're gonna get married, you're gonna get married in front of other people, and they're gonna see you make
Mm-hmm.
those
Mm-hmm.
vows. And it's like,
Yeah.
and there's see that book I mentioned earlier, The Righteous Minds, a really good book. He mentions about how there's this study that's been done multiple times in like different universities around the world, where basically what they do, they have like a coffee mug. It's in like a maybe like a student teacher lounge, something like that. It's like a pot of coffee, and there's a sign on the wall next to it. It says, "Coffee is free, but if you can make like a tip just to help us pay for it, we'd appreciate it. Not required." And there's a little tip jar, and they'll leave it there for like 6 to 8 weeks. And what they'll notice is, okay, we made $5, $5, whatever it is, and then they'll do the exact same experiment somewhere else, but the only difference is they'll put like a picture on the wall. It looks like a face looking at you as you're getting the coffee, like
Hmm.
either a pair of eyes or a face that's looking at you, and it's just like staring at you. And they noticed that like they got like 3 times as much donation money when somebody was watching you.
Wow. Wow.
And in that capacity, this is what I find funny is that I've talked to some like people I know about this, and the idea of like this is why like the idea of like Santa Claus for kids is so freaking valuable, because kids are just like we're naturally egotistical, impulsive creatures. Like our lowest level is we just want what we want whenever we want. We don't care who we bump into along the way, but we have to learn how to socialize. We have to learn how to how to cooperate in a group environment. But there's still that impulse in you to want to do the wrong thing for your own benefit as long as nobody's watching. And something like Santa Claus is good because it basically tells a little kid, I can't watch you, but somebody is watching you. And if you do the wrong thing, you're not going to get rewarded. And that's what I think is we see in a lot of religions, why they kind of evolved over time the way they did. It's like, well, God is everywhere. Like Jesus is everywhere. Allah is everywhere. Buddha, whatever you want to say it is, like they're basically watching you at all times. So you might as well be on your best behavior, because it's gonna bite you in the ass later on in some capacity, whether you go to heaven or hell, or even in the context of like with things like karma, where it's like you start to notice like bad things in your life happen, and your brain will attribute it like, oh, it's because I didn't tip that person, back when I was taking a taxi, or because I was like I ghosted that person. This is why this is happening. It's because my karma is catching up to myself right now. But having this feeling like evolutionarily, like when we know somebody is watching us, it'll sublimate the worst parts of ourselves. In that book, they made a good point talking about how like we're essentially like 90% monkey and 10% honeybee, and that we are collective social creatures. Like we're part of a colony, but we also have individual interests, and those things kind of conflict depending on the moment. But it's like the honeybee part is like, if you ever seen like a mob or like a group of people, like that mob mentality, like that just takes over your thinking. And afterwards, if you ask the person, what are you here for? And you're like, I don't know. Everyone's just getting mad, so I just got mad too. You think, why did, like, it was just an involuntary, overwhelming impulse. But at the same time, when you are surrounded by people that are all doing a particular action, this is where you see something like, you are the average of the 5 people closest to you. So if it's like if your 5 best friends are all making $1 million a year, odds are within not too long you're gonna start making really good money too. But if all 5 of your best friends are like deadbeats, not doing anything with their lives, you're just gonna be like, well, I mean, they're not doing it, so why should? And then you realize that it's like it's influencing that honeybee part of your personality, that you're just gonna kind of go with the group. And that's why it's important to have people around you that you voluntarily say, I want you in my life because you bring out the best in me, even when I don't want to.
Yeah. That's why, and just to go to what you said before, I figured, when you step in a marriage is between you and your wife and your husband and God. So you can cheat, right? Like, I mean, you can be
Yeah.
disloyal, and you're gonna be deceiving one person at best. The other one still knows, right? So that's the notion that's really important to keep in mind. And I started to maybe define God as conscience,
Mm-hmm.
but that's another topic. I don't really want to open that Pandora box. But and also, you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with. I think this is also a self-fulfilling prophecy, because as I came to like grew spiritually and business wise, and I started to better myself, I had to exclude myself from the people that I was hanging out with because we didn't have any similar interests whatsoever. But also, they didn't want to have me there either. It's not like
Yeah.
I felt like I was better and I moved on, to like a higher level or whatever. We just had nothing in common. They couldn't do
Yeah.
anything with me, right? So I
Yeah.
think that you grow from people who you surround yourself with, but then again, you surround yourself accordingly to who you are or who you aspire to be. right?
Hmm.
So it's, it's a two sides of the same coin, basically. I mean, this is why some people complain that they cannot find a partner, right? And yeah, well, that's me. I'm looking for someone, and so when you're looking to attract, so let's say you're a woman, okay, let's say you're a man and you're looking to attract women, right? I think a mistake that a lot of guys make is they go to a relationship coach or dating coach or whoever, I don't know, Jehovah's Witness, and they say, I want to attract women. That's what they say. Now, the devil's in the details. What kind of women do you want to attract? Because that's gonna affect on, like, that's gonna affect the strategy which you should be using. What a lot
Hmm.
of them are doing is they go to a dating coach, and he gives them a bunch of pickup lines, and this is what you do, that's what you should tell a woman, and so on and so forth. And they are attracting women, but again, which type of women? And then
Yeah.
they don't attract quality type of women because they use pickup lines and stuff, and their money or whatever. And then they complain about there are no good women out there. And if you're a part of the MGTOW community, that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. So that confirms
Yeah.
the theory that you have in the first place. So I think, and guys do that all the time without even noticing, right? So I think that it's really important to like specify not only what works for you in terms of life advice, but also just, you know, on the micro level, the dating advice, what type of women. I mean, the definitions are so important when you go for any type of coaching, because I mean, you're going to do yourself more harm than good, even if you succeed in that particular coaching standards, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's really important.
I think it is surprisingly difficult to be honest about like who you are. And in the context of the dating thing, I think what's interesting is that what's happening in the current I think what the dating coaching and the red pill movement, what they're doing is like they're not 100% wrong. They're not entirely right either. But there are parts of it that are like true and accurate. And the question is like, what parts of a woman are you attracting when you do what you do? There's a really good book. I'm super into books. It's called "This Is Your Brain on Birth Control." And so what it is that they've proven this, and this is something like I've actually told women this, something like my female clients, and they get mad at me, like almost like how, that's not no, and there's almost this like this defensiveness about you not being as in control of yourself as you think you are. Like, and it kind of touches, it pokes your ego a little bit when you have to admit, like, there are parts of me that have influences on me in ways that I can't openly see, but I protect myself from having to acknowledge that by saying I knew what I was doing the whole time, or I wanted to do. This is where, like, what do you want versus what do you want to want? And the question is, like, well, your external environmental influences are affecting what you want in ways that you don't realize. And in the book, they talk
Mm-hmm.
about how, essentially, in a nutshell, you are your hormones, you are your biology. If you're hungry, you didn't choose to be hungry. Your body's sending signals to your brain to tell you to go get food, and suddenly you think, "Oh, I've decided I'm hungry." No, you're not. You just like your body told you you're hungry. If you're horny, if you're angry, if you're mad, if you're happy, generally speaking, those are just chemical signals to your brain, and it kind of kills off a little bit of like the mystery around it, mystique around it, when you kind of turn it into a bit of an equation, which I think is what a lot of the red pill and the dating coaches are trying to do. They're trying to quantify the process of how do you go through courting, how do you go through finding a girl, how do you
Yeah.
go through impressing her, what's the step by step. And it's not wrong because there are parts of it that are true, but the problem is it's like setting up, like, what was that? It wasn't Coachella, but there was some kind of festival that happened down like in the Caribbean or something like that, like a year or two ago, that was supposed to be like the biggest rave, like EDM festival of all time. And it was like the advertising looked amazing, and it was a complete stir. And it's kind of like what it was. It was like, they're
Yeah.
like, oh, it's 5-star hotel and beautiful spas and room service. And it ended up just getting a bunch of tents and like jelly sandwiches. And it was a complete shit show. And it's kind of
Yeah.
what you're doing with these dating scenes, with these dating coaches, is like they're teaching you how to put on the best advertising possible. And then when they see who you really are, they're going to have no interest because you were lying the whole time. And part of it, I think, is that you're basically, so the book, I'll get at that about book. The book is This Is Your Brain on Birth Control. And what she talks about is that they did some studies, and they've proven this scientifically across the board, is that heterosexual women are attracted to different types of men depending where they are on their menstrual cycle. And so in a
Mhm.
nutshell,
Yeah.
basically what they've shown is just like, if you're in your fertile portion of your menstrual cycle where you could become pregnant, you find more masculine attributes more attractive. So facial hair, square jawline, broad shoulders, big muscles, deeper voice, whatever it may be. And that is usually how, like, that what signals to you of like testosterone. This guy is a protector. He could beat somebody up. He's going to be strong. If we have children, the children are going to be strong just like he is. When you're in the second half and you're not able to get pregnant, you're much more attracted to provider types, the guys who have resources, the guys who can acquire resources, the guys who have good status. And in a nutshell, she basically makes a point to say how in a perfect world, a woman would want a guy who is like 6'5", 300 pounds of muscle with a super square jawline who makes $500,000 a year. And then like, can you get both? Like, in a perfect world, you'd want both. But the problem being is that like no matter what you do, there's always going to be something of a compromise in a relationship. There's always going to be a taller person. There's always going to be a more handsome person. There's always going to be like a better looking guy who makes more money along the way. But in the context of like a long-term relationship, you end up kind of saying like, this is sufficient. This is good enough, more or less. I'm okay with this. Like, you are settling, yeah, but you're settling long-term compounding growth at a steady pace rather than hoping you're going to scratch off the next lotto ticket and hit the mega millions or buy the next Bitcoin and become a billionaire. Because if you do that enough times, there's like 99% of people are going to go broke doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the MGTOW community, they say women sleep with an alpha and marry the beta. So there's some truth to that.
It's true.
We always make decisions based on feelings and intuition, and then we rationalize it by logic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And that's
what and what you said at the beginning, having like a small village, a small community, people just find themselves. Well, also because there wasn't a lot of people to really choose from. Like you had 4 guys to choose from, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it was easier to pick.
I think I saw on one of your podcasts, you were interviewing a dating coach, and he was talking about the paradox of choice.
Mm-hmm.
That's familiar. There's a book, it's called The Paradox of Choice. I don't know if you've read it. It's a really good book. And he basically talks about the psychology of when you have less options to choose from, you are more happy with the decision that you made. And there's something like, I guess in the last 100 years or so, prior to the advent of like cars, only people you really had to operate with were the people within local vicinity, within your village, within your church, within your community, within people that you knew in the family. And one of the benefits that came of that was the fact that, like nowadays, if people start dating, it's like, well, it takes at least a year to get to know somebody. Back in the day, you'd be dating for like a month or two and you're married by month 3. And they're like, oh my God, it's so quick. Why? Because everybody around you was vetting that person for you as part of the vetting process. So if it's like, if your father didn't like the guy, then it was probably for good reason. If he wasn't upstanding in the community in some respect of what he could do and provide and help other people didn't like him. And if he wasn't part of the group, he wasn't part of the tribe, part of the village, then he wasn't around. And if he wasn't around, you weren't getting exposure to him. But now with things like dating apps, and like the biggest one was the automobile. I've heard this referred to as like when the automobile came along, realistically what it was just a glorified sex wagon. Because it was a great way because basically you can go to a brand new town. Nobody knows who you are. You put on a brand new identity and pretend to be somebody you're not. And all of a sudden you're just like, wow, this guy's he's charming. He's sweet. He's kind. He's caring. He's got this like charisma about him, but he might be a complete psychopath. You have no idea. Because now they've been able to circumvent the process of trying to get accepted by the group before they can actually start picking from the litter of potential mates. And that's where like the community, the village thing was like this.
It's also, I think car is also a representation of individualism.
Okay.
Which is one of the reasons why I have a lot of problems with reducing the number of cars to be driven around by some radical climate change protest. Taking away individualism, basically. So now the question here is, okay, what do we do about it now in this dating world? Do we artificially squeeze the number of people that we interact with on a daily basis? Because, I mean, what are you supposed to do with? I mean, that's good knowledge. It explains a lot, but I still don't know. Okay, so what do? I still have a huge choice of people to choose from.
So many people to choose from. Yeah, I would personally, like, as far as what do, I think that feeling's an extension of that vulnerability thing earlier, where it's like, we basically find things you like to do, be vulnerable with making friends with the people in the environment. Like sometimes making friends as an adult is when you're a kid, it's like you're a 5-year-old on the playground. You go, hey, you want to play trucks? Cool. Yeah. It's boom. We're friends now. Now as an adult, it's like, hey, if you walk up to somebody and say like, oh, this is a nice conversation. Do you mind if I get your number? I'd like to hang out with you sometime. It's just like, it feels almost like, whoa, this is weird. We're not supposed to be
Yeah.
doing this. But
Well,
historically, it really wasn't.
also as a kid, you are very much alike other people. So as a kid, all of you go to school. All of you have to, I don't know, wear a certain thing in school. All of you have parents and all of you have the same problems. Then as you grow older, you differentiate yourself more and more to the point where now I can really relate to 90% of people in my, in college or wherever, or in adult life even. We're so different from each other as we grow older that even from that point it's hard to relate to something, you know?
Yeah, and I think finding that hobby, the thing that you enjoy doing, and then finding people in that
Mm-hmm.
space you can relate to, and then taking that opportunity to be openly vulnerable with them and try to just that it depends. Like, what are you into? What are you interested in doing? What do you like to talk about? Like, even this conversation right now, like, even one thing I've come to learn about myself over time. I thought I was very antisocial when I was a kid too, and once I started doing massage therapy, I realized very quickly you have to learn how to socialize, or else you're not going to last very long. Because people come in sometimes for like the body work, but also come in just for like wanting to talk and vent. And I started to realize, holy crap, I actually really do like talking to people. I really enjoy long form conversations. Is why I'm doing the podcast as part of it. I enjoy doing that stuff, and then in the process of podcasting, you're probably going to meet new people along the way and make new friends in that capacity. There, as far as it could also be a function too of your environment. That like right now, Long Island and New York in particular, I think is becoming pretty, like the cost of living is getting more and more intense. The average age around here is kind of gradually going up. The social environment is like, it's not really what it used to be. And there might be a point where you
Mm-hmm.
had to kind of say to yourself, like, maybe I need to literally move. I need to literally go somewhere else where there's people around my age, around my type of interest in thinking, that I could just like start to be in that certain type of people that I would have a good vibe with along the way. It may just be, I feel like you've exhausted all your options and local to you, but if you're can't find anybody locally, the question is either you're not being as open as you could be to making people friends with people that would be your friends locally, or they're just not there. And it might be that it might be a different surroundings might be in your benefit to actually go and just be in an area where the likelihood of you bumping into somebody. Yeah. Being honest about your internal and your external environment. So if it's like external environment might be like, well, it's not friendly, so maybe I should go somewhere else. Internal environment is like, have I really been as open and vulnerable and honest with people around me to form potential relationships that I could have been? Or am I just telling myself that I am when I really haven't done the work that I could have been doing? And that ties back
Well,
into
it's
that
really
ability
important
to be
to
honest.
it's really important to always assume that it's your internal environment because first of all, that's good news for you, and then second, well, it's just gonna be easier. Like I always assume, and you know, I a while ago I decided to assume the best thing possible first before I start catastrophizing it step by step. So
Yeah.
even for example, if I'm, if I'm having an impulse, I give myself the benefit of the doubt. If I do something bad, I treat myself as a parent would treat the child when they do
Yeah.
something bad, it's your responsibility, but it doesn't mean it's your fault. When someone says something mean to me, I always give them the benefit of the doubt. They have a bad day, I don't know, because I still remember that was a really eye-opening experience. I talked to a lady at a bank, right? So she was a banker and she was being a bitch for an hour straight. And in my head, I already hated the hell out of her. Up until her coworker came to her and then she stood up and she hugged her and she said, "My condolences." And then,
Oh, wow.
well, and then the lady started crying and I was like, well, man, maybe I'm the dumb one here. So I always like to assume that. Like, I really will give people the huge benefit of the doubt before I get like concrete proof because, well, and after I started doing that, let me tell you, my life is so much better and I'm happier because
Yeah,
I live
yeah.
in a friendly environment, right? I don't live in a hostile environment. Well, because every time something seemingly bad happens again, there's what actually happened, and then there's the story that you derive from what happened. And the story is usually 80%. So let's say I'm parking in a parking lot, I step out of my car, and the guy says, "Hey, why the hell didn't you pay, or why the hell did you park here?" Okay, now I can answer, or I can tell him to go to hell, and then I can make up a story. Well, he doesn't like me. That's because I'm an immigrant. Why doesn't the world like me? Oh my God, everyone hates me. All to hell with everything, right? So 10% of it is what actually happened. So he asked me why I parked there, maybe not even in a mean way. And then 90% is my story. So the shorter your story, the more of the fact and the less of your story, the happier you're gonna be. Yeah, so just people, I mean, if we just stick with the facts and then try to give people the benefit of the doubt, I think it would be a much happier universe around you, really.
Yeah, it reminds me, I had this one moment, it must have been like 20 years, 15 years ago, something like that. I was driving down this narrow alleyway between two buildings to like some parking lot in the back, and there was like a 18-wheeler coming through, but they were making this weird angle, and there was a small gap that I could have, if I got sped fast enough, I could have got through the gap and got past the truck because it was slowly closing off the outlet. And I tried going and I couldn't make it. And I ended up getting like wedged in between like both sides. Like the front was here and the back was here, and it literally pinned me against the wall. And it was just like, the car didn't get damaged like that, but like the guy literally couldn't move because I was just in this weird spot that he needed the space to move the truck with. And he gets out and he's just like, you just couldn't wait, could you? You just had to try to cut the gap, try to like, you just couldn't do it. And I was like, honestly, bro, I'm so sorry. I didn't know it was a thing. I totally messed up. I'm sorry. It's my fault. My bad. Immediately, the guy was like, totally understandable. Happens to everything. How you like? I'll help with that with this, sir. Have a great day. Have a good deal. So I was like, whoa. What the hell? So I was just brutally honest. Like, I effed up. My bad. It's totally on me. I'm sorry. And he went from like, what is wrong with you? You actually admitted your mistake. Cool. All right, good. I'm cool with that. I understand. And
On
being
your
like, yeah,
external world, your external world is always going to be a reflection of your internal world. You have two types of people. You have people who get in a car crash and they step out and then start yelling at a person. What the fuck were you doing? And then you have the other type of people who step out and they say, oh my God, are you okay? And these two
yeah,
people have very different lives.
yeah. And it
So,
reminds
yeah.
me of, and that's what I do a lot with massage, which is where I don't know if it's like a natural gift that I had that massage kind of ended up exaggerating a little bit more. I'm not trying to like toot my own horn here. Is like the ability to read between the lines of people emotionally and see like how like their words and their actions are not lining up to what their body is displaying. And you can tell like you can see this, people are trying to lie to themselves to avoid going through like feeling the emotions that they're trying to push off. And it's not my job to pull it out of them, but I will try to give people the benefit of the doubt once in a while, or the opportunity to talk to that. If I can like rather than smash the door open, I'll just like gently knock and be like, "Hey, does anybody in there that wants to talk?" Yeah, cool. And I remember I had a patient. This happened a number of times. But I had a patient who came in. Her husband had open heart surgery, and he had open heart surgery, and they had two kids, and she was working like a full-time job and taking care of him and taking care of two little boys, and she was like up to here, just trying to stay above water, just like stressed out of her mind. And she came in for massage, and I knew about the whole situation. And she came in, and I was just like, she's like lays down on the table, and I was like, all right, so how's everything been going with you? Good. Okay. How's your husband's recovery going? Fine. I'm like, one word answer. It's just fine. It's like just stoic. And so I kind of like once in a while poke a question, like, how's that? And finally I was like, I look for a reason to kind of, I'll just follow my page. I'll try to find a reason to like draw the connection. Like your shoulders feel tight. How's your stress levels been? I know your stress levels are really high. I'm not going to say, oh, you're definitely stressed about the divorce you're going through, right? It's more like, oh, your shoulders are tight. How's your stress been? And I remember I was working on her shoulders, and I said, like, oh, your shoulders are kind of tight. How's your stress levels been? And she took a deep breath, and she started hysterical crying for like 10 minutes straight. And she needed to. She needed to, because she had so much tension pent up in her that she was desperately trying to fight off the need to let that emotion just run through her system, let it come out as it needed to. But she was desperately trying, like, maybe if I get a massage, it'll calm me down. It's like, you need to let it out. You need to like let your body digest and process the emotion that wants to come out, and don't fight it wholeheartedly. And in that capacity, I think there's an overlap there with like people like pent up emotion and whatnot. Like in the case of like, you know, like you get into a car crash and you're freaking out. It's like, is it real? Or if you get cut off while you're driving, is it really that the person was an a-hole, or is that having a bad day? Like my joke for myself, whenever I get like cut off or got someone honking at me and wants me to go faster, I'm just like, they probably have to go to the bathroom really, really, really badly. That's why they're in a rush right now. That's probably what it is. I feel bad for them because I've been in that situation. Like they are this close to crapping their pants, and they're just like, get off the road, I gotta go. rather than they're just in a bad mood or something terrible is happening. So yeah, you just kind of like it's. I think what you're getting to is this idea of before all that is locus of control, is recognizing like what is actually within your capacity to control, what is outside your capacity to control, and is it worth getting mad at the things that you can't control? Like I can't control the other driver in the car next to me, but I can't control how I respond to it. Or if an emotion comes up that's like, I want to just punch this guy in the face, and just like, I'm not gonna listen to that. It's not good. It's not worth something it's worth listening to or try to lean into that capacity. And you end up getting a lot more done in life, a lot more benefit in your day to day when you learn it's not worth stressing about the things that you can't control. It's not worth losing sleep over the things that you can't control. Better to just focus on things you can, and being honest and truthful with yourself about the things that you can control, rather than just focusing on like, oh, this thing happened at work and this guy cut me off in traffic, and it's like, yeah, but did you do the best that you could have done today? Did you do everything that you could have done for yourself today to make sure you had the best day you could have had within things that were within your range of control? And there's this funny like we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, like there's this funny thing about like having to grieve like the past in a way, and your life at the point that it's at right now, and realizing like, turns out I had more control this whole time than I thought I did, which means I could have done so much more with my life than I thought I did, that I could have up to this point. And now I have to A, accept that fact and start moving forward with it, and B, let go of the personal sense of resentment and self-attacking myself because of things I could have done before I didn't know I could have done up until this point when I realized I had more control than I thought I did. Or what a lot of people like to do is basically say like, no, it's not in my control. My life is a function of people around. I'm things outside my control, and I can't control it, and it's not worth even trying. So it's easier to stay resentful towards the universe rather than be honest with myself and accept that I could have done more than I actually did.
Yeah, that's always convenient. Getting mad, I figure, is like drinking a poison and expecting the other person to die. And I think that what's also very important is, but we all know what to do, right? I think that if I'm trying to achieve something fundamental, subconsciously, I know exactly what to do.
Mm-hmm.
But we just don't take our own advice. If I took my own advice for everything that I knew what I should have done, I would be so much better.
Yeah.
And I recently talked about that on my podcast, because we had a problem in our family, and I told my grandmother, look, this is not that big of a problem, really. Just go to bed, don't stress it out. It's not a problem. Worry about it when it's actually going to be a problem, because worrying about a problem that doesn't exist is like you're paying bills that don't exist. It's worrying about a problem that exists, it's a lack of faith. Worrying about a problem that doesn't exist, it's there's no excuse for that. And then the next day she said, I really slept very well. Thank you so much for this advice. It was the best advice ever. I took it, and man, it really made me more happy. And I'm thinking, yeah, well, damn it, I didn't take the advice. I didn't sleep throughout the night. And it really makes me wonder, like, if I took my own advice every single time, it would be so much better. But I don't, so it is what it is. But it's really a good thing to really meditate on, that we know what to do. We do.
Yeah,
we really do.
A lot of it is just practice. It's practicing and recognizing. Again, for me, the way I put it, perspective is like, when I have those moments where I want to do something I know I shouldn't be doing, or show like, what's the best advice? Don't eat the junk food. Go to the gym and work out. It's like, but what do I want to do? It's something totally different. So it must be, and it's just interesting. I've had people in my life do this, where they'll use their feelings, even though it may not be the best thing. And I think it's interesting because I was watching the podcast with Tam Peterson, who was talking about like being receptive to the word of God, and like, what does he want you to do? But then the question becomes like, well, are you sure that this voice is like God's voice, or is it like the devil's voice mimicking God's voice? Because sometimes you might have things where you're like, well, this is what I really want to do, is sit in bed all day and not go to the gym, and then eat junk food and feel like crap and play video games and jerk off to porn and not do anything with my life. That's what I really just feel like doing. It must be because that's what the divine is telling me to do right now. Like, even with working out, sometimes like there are days when I won't go because I know I'm just too tired and too fatigued that I want to injure myself. But then you have to sit there and ask yourself, like, are you actually tired and fatigued, or could you do something and you're just justifying laziness? And it becomes difficult to learn how to differentiate between the two, and making sure that you're doing, like, you're really taking time off and not doing it because you need it, not because you feel like you want it. And like I've had fun people like I said, like people who do like use a religious angle of like, well, because I feel this way, it must be a sign from God. Like, or you feel this way because certain behavioral patterns are reinforcing themselves. Like I tried socializing and nobody wants to talk to me. It must be a sign from God that you find people to talk to you. Like, or did you really try socializing, or did you really try? My favorite is people who are like grossly overweight within their control to say fix, but like to handle and deal with. I tried every diet, none of them work. Did you really try it, or did you kind of just give it a shot for a couple of days and then kind of felt like crap? And then, like, and this is where it's interesting, where it's like this detoxification we talked about earlier, of giving something an honest try means having to voluntarily change your behaviors and withstand the internal emotional like fighting back that your body's going to do of having to change your course correct your behaviors. And one thing I notice a lot of people with like health and wellness and even personal development and whatnot is like everybody wants the benefit of a new behavior without actually changing their behavior themselves, and they also don't recognize what changing your behavior feels like. And that's a big one, I think, where it's like when I went on carnivore, my stomach was a little bit all over the place for a couple of days to a week. And it was like, my body was like, what, we've never had this much red meat before. What the hell's going on? But after about a week or two, I felt 10 times better. And like every one of my problems just vanished within like 2 weeks. Like my anxiety, my depression, my sleep, my energy is super consistent and clean now. I don't have any crashes. I don't have like midday naps anymore. I can just go straight through the day 100%, no problem. But in that very beginning, when it starts to have that weird reaction in your stomach when you're changing a diet, and all of a sudden, like, not only do you feel a little weird, your energy is a little bit different, maybe you're detoxing and pushing some toxins out of your body, but at the same time, you're like, but God, I'd kill for a jelly donut right now and some Skittles and like a sugary drink and some soda. It must be that my body's like, this is not agreeing with this. When in reality, it's like what you're doing is like, it's like the last death throes of the bad behavior in you. It's fighting to just cling on to life. And it's interesting. It almost ties back into this point of like the religion thing of how like I think this is the Jordan Peterson thing is like part of you in order to become the person you want to be, whether that be in your behavior of your diet, in your personal life, your socializing, the person you were before has to die to make room for the person you want to be. And you'd rather it be that like your ideas and your behaviors die off rather than you do trying to achieve this new form of life. It's what you mentioned before, telling the truth is so painful. And it's literally because that liar in you is starving to death. She's like, that part of you that wants to do that is atrophying and dying off. And you basically have to voluntarily say, like, I'm okay with this person, this part of me dying off, and I'm going to withstand the withdrawal and the death throes and like the frustration and the temptation is going to kind of creep in order to get to this better part of my life where I'm going to have a better behaviors and better outcomes from the things that I choose to do. But it's painful. It's a painful process. And a lot of people, I think nowadays, especially with things like smartphones and any kind of social media, but also with current technologies, they do everything they can to make sure you're feeling good at all times. And it's really not a healthy way to live. It's not that you're not supposed to feel good at all times, but you're not supposed to be in this heightened state of feeling just blissful 24 hours a day. Because you wouldn't know what bliss feels like if you didn't go through some shit along the way. You kind of need to endure some suffering once in a while to actually enjoy the good times.
Well, you can also say that the social media and everything, they're actually trying to pull you away from the truth. Because you can also look at the truth as if you're driving in a car that you cannot afford, if you're wearing clothes that you cannot afford, like, isn't that a form of lying? Isn't that a form of deceit?
No.
So, and just what you said before, being confused about whether it's the word of God or the word of the devil, this is where I really started thinking about God being conscience, because you cannot work out, you cannot socialize. And then you can tell yourself, oh, well, they don't want me, so I'm not going to socialize. All right, that's it, and that's done, and then you close that chapter. But then your consciousness comes out, and then you figure, I didn't work out. Man, I feel bad about not working out. I feel bad about lying to that person, and I felt bad about not socializing enough. Maybe that's God speaking to you. So maybe you can't really go away from God not speaking to you. Maybe you not hearing what God says takes a lot more effort than hearing what he says, because you need fabrication in order for you to not listen. So I really need to work on this theory of mine, God being conscience.
Yeah.
That's why it
there's a
sees and knows
thing,
everything.
there's a YouTuber podcaster. His name is Dr. K. Runs a YouTube channel called Healthy Gamer GG. And what he does, he mostly focuses on people who are struggling with video game addiction, which is much the thing that I went through for a long time, on and off, and like recognizing that like I have a natural. I don't think it's even an addictive personality. I think the games themselves are. This is kind of the danger, even inherent in that, is like with social media and the games itself, like it's turning like maybe a percentage of the population of people who are just naturally addicted to certain things, like more like the amount of effort needed to push them into an addiction is not that much. But if you took an average, if you took like a celibate monk living in like in the Himalayas who has like, you know, trained his entire life to be like super one with himself and Zen, and all doesn't succumb to temptation of any kind. If you took that guy and threw him in the middle of a strip club with like nothing but like cocaine and hookers and beer, so eventually he would snap. Even the best of us can snap eventually. So what's the problem? I think what's happening nowadays is people are like, this is like a limbic capitalism thing we talked about earlier, is that society is trying desperately to pull every single person possible into this addictive state of mind to try to pull out every possible penny they can. But the problem is that there's a debt to be paid on that. And there's a good quote I like. It's kind of one of the inspirations for this podcast, which was, take what you want as long as you're willing to pay the price. And in this case, I actually had a podcast interview with a woman who's a financial coach. And one thing we talked about was the ridiculousness of like buy now, pay later. And that's essentially what people are doing, where it's like, I'll just put it on my credit card and pay it off later on. I'll worry about that issue. Like eventually that bill is going to come due, and then it's going to be so freaking big. It's going to be a hill, a wall you can't climb over. It's going to literally just fall over and crush you and kill you. But you're shirking off the problems of today to tomorrow, but eventually tomorrow comes. It will hit you eventually. The Dr. K thing we're talking about is that he mentions consciousness as like that part of you, and it could very well be God, it could be the universe, whatever it is, the part of you that knows what you need to do that you're just not doing. Like deep down, if you ask yourself what the answer is, like there's a part of you that is really, really good. Or just talk to yourself and basically saying like the advice that I give to other people is advice that I myself should be taking. Why am I not taking it? Well, what if I just started taking it and voluntarily withstanding the internal pushback that I'm getting from my ego, getting from my own personality, not wanting to take the advice because for whatever reason, you know, dieting and exercising and taking care of yourself, like it works for other people, but not for you. You should keep drinking and eating junk food and like stay in bed till like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. But for whatever reason, it doesn't work for you. And it's like you said, parenting yourself. And it's almost like that parent in you is that consciousness. It's that voice of God. It's that voice of whatever it may be, the universe. That like there's a separate part of you somewhere in your brain that knows what you need to do, but there's another part of you that's like an angry child that wants that impulsiveness, that wants that. This is something I've noticed a lot. It was very funny with people I work with massage, is that they'll tell me everything. They'll tell me like, you know, what's going on with their life, their family, their marriages, their work, their sex lives. Sometimes though, I notice with people like is that like you'll have people who are just have an inability to see past their own 2 feet. And I'm not sure about something that's necessarily something that's taught or learned or something you have to just practice with time and effort and things like that. But like they can speak out loud. They could basically like this is a big one. I don't know if it's like they weren't taught to. Maybe this is what the village used to do for people. Is like it was like a collective rising water lifts all boats. If everybody is like everybody's growing together. That I used to work in a chiropractor's office to massage, and down the hallway was like a clinic. It was like a hypertension and nephrology clinic, and people, I'd be out in the hallway and I'd hear people walking past me who were leaving the clinic. And I would literally hear some people who were just like walking with walkers, but they're like 400 pounds overweight, or they're in like a scooter chair and they could barely walk. And they've got like diabetes and high blood pressure and heart disease and everything you can think of. And it's all just tied to like their terrible diet. And I remember a couple times walking past them and hearing them say like, yeah, the doctor said I had to jack up, you know, this prescription and these numbers up and my sugar levels will elevate it to this, and this. By the way, do you want to go grab McDonald's for lunch? And I'll just be like, how did you not hear what you just said? How did you not hear what you just like, do you not realize that clap is why you're in this doctor's office? This is why you're here. And I think in some cases, some people, like my good friend of mine, she became diabetic in the last like 5 or so years. And she had some behavior she had to change. She didn't realize. And I remember she said she went to like this group and it was like a first timer diabetes support group. So like what to do, what to expect, what to know, what to not. And she was basically going in thinking like, okay, I understand sugar. Definitely need to get under control. But maybe there's some other things I'm not really super familiar with that could be causing these problems, and I don't really know what they are. And so when she went to the she was expecting, oh, it turns out these foods that you wouldn't think are actually bad are actually kind of, she was expecting that. And what she got was a ton of people just going like, okay, so can we have soda? Like, no, you can't. Can we have like, what about candy? Like, no. No. What about like diet soda with sugar added? You're like, oh my God, are you serious right now? And I think a lot of people don't realize like this, like the simplest solution in this case is, but sometimes or often tends to just be the best one. Tends to just be that the answer is right in front of you. It's within you. You know what it is, but you just are reluctant to hear it because you're just desperately hoping, like I said before, the behavior thing. You're hoping that I can continue the same behavior I had before and get different results.
Well, I mean, you can take this concept, then you can place it on like a psychological, social level, because let's say you want to fix your relationship, but you don't want to fix your anger management.
Yeah,
Right? So it goes, it's, I think this appears in every single point in your life. Right. So we tend to not fix the fundamentals, but it's easier to fix the superficial. Right. You want to, yeah.
There's a guy you talked to about, I forget his name. I think it was like maybe a week ago. It was a dating coach.
Mm-hmm.
And he was talking, he mentioned something about how, like, if you don't work on identifying your own attachment patterns, like anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, you'll end up attracting people without even realizing it.
All the
And
time.
I've done a lot of work. Yeah. And that becomes that question of, like, what's really pulling the strings on me? What's really pulling the strings inside me? And like, why did I not see it soon? Like, even for me personally, I have a bit more of like an anxious attachment style that I've come to learn and I'm working on and done like a tremendous amount of work with. But what's interesting about that is that I'm not sure if he talked about this, but generally speaking, more often than not, the way to actually correct that attachment style behavior is in a relationship. Either while you're dating somebody and basically saying, like, this is who I am, but I don't want to be this person, so I'm asking you to be like my accountability partner and to actually work through it. And it's funny how that kind of ties into the whole like communal village thing, which is like, in order to bring out the best version of myself, I need to surround myself with people who want to see the best version of me. Like, I can't do this alone. I have to have people around me to help me do it.
Yeah, well, I try to kind of solo practice this, and the way I do it is, well, I'll give you an example. So I had plans with my family, and then they canceled this plan and then made another plan, and then I was very angry about it. So I said, okay, well, now let's just focus on the emotion. Okay, let's identify it. Anger. Okay, where does it come from? How do I feel? Abandoned. Okay, abandonment. I even gave it a color. It's blue. And then I asked myself, okay, when was the last time I felt abandonment in my childhood? And then I picked up a couple of events. So then I kind of went back circle from this. So I identified the emotion. What exactly is it? Okay, where do I feel it? I felt it in my upper stomach, by the way. And when did I felt that as a child? Okay, interesting. Okay, so there's that. So this is not about this single event. This is about my like my historical feelings, you know what I mean? And so I started doing that as one person. It's not as good as if you have someone or like a village around, but I think you can kind of, I mean, you can kind of start building it that way. Yeah.
Yeah. That's there's two quotes that tie into like the idea of the podcast here. It's two proverbs, two African proverbs. It's it takes a village to raise a child. And the second one is the child that is not embraced by the village will burn it down in order to feel its warmth. And I think what you're seeing a lot nowadays essentially is like the village is on fire. And it's in the form of like people aren't dating anymore, people like divorce rates collapsing, like the economy's going to crap, there's a lot of political infighting, like there's just intergenerational conflict, whereas before you'd have like intergenerational wisdom and things like that, where basically like the elders would be the ones passing along what to learn and what to do. And now you're just like all of that gets tied up into just like you can have like your grandmother or your grandfather or your parents like give you some wisdom and advice, and rather than say like you've been around longer than I have, you know more than I do, there might be some merit to what you're saying. Now all you see are people go, okay, boomer, okay, okay, boomers, whatever. Yeah, and it's like the aspect like that inner child thing, and that's what I kind of question is like, I understand on occasion if you get like a small percentage of the population of people's inner child, will say, or kids' childhoods was a little bit tumultuous, and it sometimes will create these people who have disorganized attachment styles, which will then lead to problems in relationships later on, which lead to dysfunctional homes, and they have kids, and then their kids become dysfunctional because they're dysfunctional, and the process repeats itself. But generally speaking, I imagine it was pretty much mostly contained to like a small percentage of the population. But now it seems like it's just getting more and more excessive and dramatic. And this is where like that idea of like ties back to everything we talked about in the beginning. Is just like, what were those customs and ideas and traditions within the village that basically prevented these things from happening? Like that ensured that you get kids that go from like baby to toddler to small to child to adult, like to young adult to adult, so that they can then repeat the process again in a smooth, coherent pattern. And like what you're talking about is like shadow work, where basically you're trying to be honest about yourself and ask, like, can I tie this back to an event that happened at some point in the past that I've been holding on to some emotion for a long time I don't realize I'm doing? The funniest is a funny example, like, and I've been open about this with a lot of people. My sister's a very independent person, and she's a great person. My mother was very like clingy. She was like a helicopter mom. It was like oil and water. Did not mix at all. A lot of fighting in the household growing up, and I'm just a naturally agreeable person. I don't really like conflict if I don't have to. I try to avoid it. I have people I know who love fighting, and it's not my cup of tea. And I remember like when I was growing up, they would get into an altercation, they get into a fight, and they'd be screaming in the house, and I didn't like it, and it would really upset me. And then years later, we all kind of realized, like, okay, like, well, that was just like, difficulties of childhood with some problems along the way. But like my mother and her became best friends when she moved out of the house. They were best friends. They became like besties. They were top of the world together. They just couldn't live together. And I remember I was out at an department store like 5-6 years ago, and I don't know where I was shopping for something, and I was like 27, 28 years old, and out of nowhere, this couple nearby just started like arguing about some nonsense, whatever it was. There was something that they were just diffusing some anger, and I started yelling, and it came out of nowhere. And as soon as I heard the yelling, I literally felt the top to bottom anxiety like wave run through my system. Whoa, what the hell was that? I stopped, and it was like, that was like hearing me screaming in the house when I was 10 years old. It's been sitting in my system this whole time, and I had no idea. Holy crap. What the hell? And you'd be amazed how many of these little triggers are just sitting in the back of your mind from like that are pulling your behavior and patterns and things like that. When you get into a relationship, you start dating somebody, and all of a sudden you have these weird feelings and thoughts and anxieties and whatnot, and they start coming out. You're like, and this is what I point to about like, is it really consciousness and God's word telling you, like, if you're in a relationship with somebody in a healthy manner and you're starting to have doubts and scares and feelings because really you might have attachment issues from your childhood, and then that's manifesting the way it's manifesting, is it actually like your body telling you this is a bad person, or is it your body telling you run away, you're in danger again because of that thing you did what you had to deal with when you were 5 years old? And it becomes difficult to differentiate the difference between the two. And I think the best way you end up differentiating between the two in this context essentially is by looking around you, the people closest to you, and like looking at their lives and the decisions that they've made, and see, does the decision that they've made line up with the outcomes they wanted in life? And if they did, I should mimic that, emulate that, even if it doesn't feel like it's the best thing to do. Like realistically, most people should be investing their money into like mutual funds and the S&P 500 long-term retirement. Why? Because the biggest majority of people actually got to retirement out of anybody. What do you want to do? What you want to do is put all your money into crypto and pray to God it's going to pop off like it did back in 2005. But in reality, like that's a very small subsection of the population of people who got dramatically lucky off of a gamble versus the people who did it right. And in the case of like relationships, for example, it's like asking people around you and talking to people around you, observing their relationships and their marriages and their things like that, and say like, how did you do it? Like when you have this and you have this particular event feeling come up and this thought come up, how did you do it? And how did the society and the village kind of reinforce that? Because I think part what you're seeing nowadays, a big portion of what you're seeing nowadays with like like divorce is skyrocketing right now in all age ranges. I think people in the age of like 60 to 80 years old in the past like 10, 15 years has tripled as far as like the divorce rates go. And then the question was like, were you really this unhappy the entire time? And you're just holding out? It's like, is that what marriage is supposed to be? Or was it a combination of like circumstances that happened way back in the day, probably post World War II, where a lot of these couples were getting married in the first place, that like, this is what I've heard, and this is my combination theory. And what I've heard is that like on both sides of the point, the one point is you got men coming back from World War II who were traumatized, a lot of PTSD, a lot of like trauma from what the crap that they saw over there, a lot of dramatic around of cultural shifts because now we're entering the communications age, the globalization age. Everything is instantaneous communication worldwide, and two, a lot of women entering the workforce, which was kind of a dramatic shift away from where most women were as far as like traditional gender roles, which then leads to these family trying, like the family unit trying out a brand new dynamic that they didn't do before. And then now it's almost like an experiment. It's been running for like 70 years now. And we're now starting to see like there's a possibility it doesn't work as well as we thought it did. Right. And so, but then the problem being that people will look around and say like, well, I'm not happy in my relationship. Well, why not? I don't know. I'm just not. Well, what do other people do? Well, they didn't seem like they were happy either, so they got divorced, so I should get divorced too. Rather than, that's like the quick and easy thing, rather than say to yourself, could there be something going on in me that needs to be addressed that I'm not addressing? Like you said with the emotional point before, when you said like your family did something different and that kind of made that stir up some anger in you. And rather than saying like, I'm angry, I deserve to be angry, and I'm going to be angry. You said, okay, I'm feeling angry. Let me examine this. And once I really thought about it, I realized I'm not actually really angry. Really what it is, it's triggering of an old memory from when I was a kid that reminded me of being abandoned. If I could deal with that, then in the future, moving forward, I'm going to have better outcomes rather than just falling prey to your emotions in the moment.
Yeah, it's usually like that with negative feelings. Whenever I really deeply research them and when I look at them, they disappear. If I ignore them, then that's when they become bigger and bigger and just take over, like probably a big part of your life as well. And this, what you just said, actually, it goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Why am I not there? Why am I not where I thought I was going to be? And why does it make sense for me to figure out a path for myself, and why not follow what everyone else is doing? Well, you have your average person. The average person in America and in Europe as well is broke. They're probably divorced, they're overweight, and they are not happy with their work. And you want to be normal, right? So I think, the evidence is right there, but we still seem to claim to this, like, what's the right path that everyone is taking, because that's the path that I should take. Right.
Yeah.
And it is hard to be outside of the box. If you want to have different results, then I don't see what else is there for you to do, really. Yeah.
What's interesting is that the people I came to realize that the people in my life, from my old ones from college, from high school, the ones that are what I would classify as succeeding, if they got married, they have a good career, they have kids, they have a strong family unit. I actually sat down and I thought about it. I realized a lot of them came from more traditional and cultural backgrounds. Like a couple friends who were Middle Eastern, a couple friends who were Asian, a couple friends who were like came from Hispanic families and whatnot. And like they still have more of a bit of like a sense of like there is a structure and a path and like all the kids are watching and observing every variation of like a marriage and a family unit, how they could be. They have connections for days. They have all the problem solving. It's a self-contained little village. So all the kids coming up through there, they have all these role models to pick from and keep them on the right path. And they're very cognizant about certain things, and it's like they are their own little self-contained village. They're all doing things together for the betterment of everyone, not just the individual. And if I compare myself or my other friends who have not really found like that kind of success in life, I realize like our families are like my weddings. If I go to a wedding up with a friend from my family, it's like we're lucky to pass 150, 200 people if we're lucky. But at other weddings, it's like we had to cap it at 800 because we had no more seats. There was literally no more room. We had to rent out the entire hotel. It was crazy. But what you realize is that people start to, again, you are the sum of the 5 people closest to you, or the average of the 5 people closest to you, that you start to see that like these cultures and these groups of people, they try to intentionally cultivate a surrounding environment, the family, and multi-generational level, such that each successive layer of kids, like the kids coming in, the newborn babies see the toddlers and how they behave, because the toddlers see how the young adults behave. The young adults see how like the teenagers behave, and the teenagers see how the adults behave. The adults see how the grandparents behave, and it's like this multi-level structuring of like we have somebody we can look to along the way at all times as to what we should be doing and keeping us on that path towards a productive, successful, happy life. And productive, successful, happy life being like the odds of it being something that involves you having a monogamous short, like a strong monogamous long-term relationship in response to a life and career with good habits that are productive and compounding in a positive way, and seeing how people around them, they created this environment where like we're basically creating this giant engine that's going to be people that are going to, young kids that are turning into a functional adults that are going to replace this and keep the engine going. Whereas I think over here in the West, or even in Europe and parts of things like that, everything's become so fragmented, so separated through different things. Like we have social media and global intercommunication through our cell phones bigger than ever, but at the same time, it's like I ask people like, when's the last time you spent time with like your next door neighbor had a barbecue? When's the last time you just like went down the block and just talked to somebody about something? Everyone, like the big thing that drives me nuts is like when I see somebody, I stay off Facebook now outside of maybe business purposes, but it's like, it's almost like if I haven't seen somebody in a long time and then I've seen their entire life on Facebook, when I see them in person, there's like nothing to talk about because I've already seen everything. I've already lived through your life up to this point. And there's this benefit to having like that kind of like that time apart to like go out there, live your life, explore the world, conquer some new dragons, do some cool new things, and then come back and talk about it. But people are just becoming so separate despite the fact that we're so close nowadays, and how it's causing these extra little ripple effects in our socializing, our behaviors, and our biology and cultural norms and things like that. And it's interesting to look around and see like, why am I not where I want to be in my life right now? Well, what kind of environment did I grow up in? What's wrong with that environment? If there is something wrong with it, could there be something different that can influence the next generation? Which is why I wanted this podcast, to talk to people and say like, you seem pretty successful. This person seems successful. This person's successful. What was your life like? What was like? If the village, you need a village to raise a child. If you're the child at the center of the village, what did your village look like? Because clearly some villages are working and some are not. And why not?
Yeah. And I think that we kind of fulfill this need for villages that we don't have, and the need for tribes that we don't have, by joining political parties. Maybe that's the artificial, maybe that's the artificial replacement of what we actually need. Maybe that's people, joining radical Islam or something. Maybe, I don't know, because if we really need it, then maybe there has to be something that we're compensating that with. And I think that I don't see anything besides that to be a compensation for a tribe, except for cults and political parties and other different identity groups.
Yeah, there's a guy, his name is Adam Lane Smith. He's an attachment specialist. He has a YouTube channel dedicated to like attachment theory and breaking bad patterns and attachment and behaviors and whatnot. And he has a story he tells about how he used to work as a therapist, and he worked in like state prisons, like federal and state prisons, and working with like prisoners who are hardcore dudes who have, they've murdered people, they have had terrible, crazy lives. And he says this one story about a guy he worked with, and he said like, the guy was asking him, like, I can't understand why I just can't do like the right thing. I can't do like, the good thing in society. Why I feel like I have to do the worst things just to get like, get ahead in life. So I have to go out and beat people up and kill people and sell drugs. I just don't understand why I don't want to do the right thing. And he asked him, he said like, at what point in your life, like, did anyone in your life ever tell you that you wouldn't be loved or valued for doing the right thing? And apparently the guy just broke down crying, hysterical crying, because he realized like somehow he had gone his entire life without anyone saying like, listen, if you put yourself together and you get a good job and work hard and get an education and like clean yourself up, we're going to value you. We're going to want you around. And I think this is what you see in a lot of like lower income communities where like there's a major crisis of like, single parent households and things like that, where the kids, especially the young boys, they grow up into like more often into like crime and gang violence. And the gang ends up being the tribe that you didn't have growing up. It ends up being like, that's the family that wasn't, that's the village that wasn't there. You're gonna find a village whether you want to or not. The question is, are you getting to the one that is actually beneficial for you? And if it's not, you have to be honest with yourself about trying to find a new one or creating your own one, rebuilding your own one from scratch if you have to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you can ask yourself what made that person join a gang instead of a church. That's a valuable question, Why would someone join a gang instead of a church? It's the same type of community. They have the same type of rituals and love, or so it seems, right?
I think more often than not, if I had to guess, and I'm not an expert in this, but I've done a little bit of research here and there, is that like more often than not, in terms of gang violence, it ends up being young men being indoctrinated into male-focused gangs. And what ends up happening is that it's more because there was a lack of a father. There was a lack of a masculine figure in their life, demonstrating like what healthy masculinity looks like, what being a protector and a provider looks like in a community sense, what your role is in the world, your ability to self-regulate your emotions and things like that. Like this is over here, this interesting thing I was talking about men and like emotional regulation is that people to think that women are extremely emotional. Maybe, but I think what the misconception is that men have a higher capacity for emotional arousal than women do. So like when men get emotionally aroused, it can go a lot further hormonally, internally, and physiologically than it does for women. And when that happens, things get broken and people get punched in the face and bones get broken and crazy shit happens. So as a society, we basically have learned to come to value the man that can control that. Young boys are not taught how to control that. Oh, they are taught. They're supposed to be taught how to control that. But if they're not being taught how to control those emotions and those impulses by somebody else around them, usually somebody that they might be able to respect, and they end up learning from somewhere. Or in another case scenario, you get a lot of these kids, these young guys who are being over-medicated. ADD and ADHD. It's like, oh, these boys, they're 5 years old and they can't sit still in class. There must be something wrong with them. Like, or they're just 5-year-old boys who are energetic and curious. And rather than find ways to express that curiosity in a productive way, because curiosity and play is actually a big part of the development circuitry in kids, you end up suppressing it through the use of medications and you end up dulling them out. But that only really ends up probably sublimating those emotions that were never properly dealt with in the first place. I think it's a huge problem you see in the West, which is where we're basically like again with smartphones and technology, we're creating this environment where people are being taught to ignore their emotions in favor of something satisfying in the moment, rather than say like you should sit here, like you said before, with like you felt that feeling in your chest about the abandonment, but rather than like just say I'm gonna go on my phone and just watch some cool videos, but you basically said I'm gonna sit here. I'm going to wait for it to pass through my system. My body's kind of like let it out. Maybe I'll cry a little bit. Maybe I'll have a little bit of like a shaking, a little bit of an anxious response, but I'm going to let it pass through me voluntarily. And I'm going to show my body that it's okay to like have these moments, have these feelings, have these emotions, have them come out. And I think what you're seeing now,
well, you have to decide to do spring cleaning. I think it's the same with every addiction, because also the way I beat my addiction was just meditating basically and seeing what pops up, because you cannot do spring cleaning. Okay, so let's say you have a refrigerator and then you have a bunch of rotten things in it. It's gonna look ugly in the middle of your spring cleaning, not at the beginning, because everything looks just fine. The refrigerator is closed. The ugliest it's gonna look like is when you have everything out there, and then after a while you're gonna start placing things in. Well, first you're gonna have nothing, and that hurts, but then you're going to start placing healthy products in, and then at the end it's going to look like how you want it to look like. I think you can also take that with friendships. A lot of people, instead of having a closed fridge, which is having zero friends, they rather have rotten food in it just to have something, just to have someone. And also what you said about like not having a father, I think it's really interesting. It's the Fibonacci retracement notion that you can see everywhere, because I also noticed that in the political sphere, because I see the right as a role of a father and then the left as a role of a mother. So at the moment we have an Oedipal mother and no father. So what do you get from that? Well, you get a narcissistic child, and our community is pretty narcissistic. So I think it's really incredible to me that we don't notice that, because the right used to have a role of a father, and now it's first of all it's passive, maybe even absent, and then whatever it does is it tries to pull back the radical left, which is the Oedipal mother going crazy. The left has like a collective borderline personality disorder. It's trying to just pull it back, and that's all it's doing. But that's not the role of a father. And citizens need both parties to have a healthy communication and to talk to each other and to like each other and to compliment each other when each and every one of them is lagging, right? So not only do you have this situation, you also have these parents talking bad about each other. Now we know what happens to the child when the parents are bad mouthing each other. It's really that, it's not a party. And that's what we have. Yeah, it's the same dynamic.
Yeah, and I think in that capacity, this ties back to that idea from earlier about you have multiple sub-personalities in your mind,
Mm-hmm.
and it ends up being like the evil mother ends up being like what's interesting about that, and this is kind of a problem I think we're seeing. I'm suspecting, I'm just making a broad assumption, guess, theory about the future that we're probably going to inadvertently move back into more quote unquote traditional gender roles in society with time, but it's going to be adaptive in a changed form. Because historically, from my understanding of the Oedipal mother, that was Freud's discovery, was that
Mm-hmm.
most of his clients were affluent women who didn't have to work. Like they were just basically like the ultimate stay-at-home mother, where all they had was their kids and nothing else. But the vast majority of women outside of that, if you were in the middle of the lower income class at that age, that time period, like you had to tend to the house and the farm and the business and to your husband and to your kids. So you were preoccupied in the community in other different ways, in your business, in your home, things like that. But if you're really like, especially nowadays in the West, it's like if you're like some of the most problematic people are the people that have no problems. Like they just
Yeah.
look for problems to create
Yeah.
because they don't realize that their brain is a problem-solving machine. But if there's no problem to solve, you're just going to start looking for problems that are not actually there. And in that
Mm-hmm.
capacity, it's like, yeah, I think what ends up happening with the evil mother and all that stuff is that it ends up being this sub-personality that has gotten way too big compared to the other ones. Like
Mm-hmm.
the job of a good mother would be like, do my best to raise my kids and then let them out into the world and let the world beat the shit out of them in a productive way, but let them know that I'm still here if they need something from me, but still let them be functioning members of society because I'm not going to be around forever. And it's unfair of me to basically try to hold my kid back in order to benefit me and like hold on to me in a way. But that sub personality normally is like if it was taking up approximately equal space in your mind of like, well, I do want to take care of my kids, but I also have to take care of the farm because if I don't take care of the farm, we're going to starve to death. And if the house, doesn't get tended to, it could set on fire. And then my husband needs this and that. So like, it's like you want to focus on this, but you have to distribute your focus evenly so that you end
Yeah.
up being a productive human being because you're bouncing between a number of different things, and you kind of let this take care of itself with time. Kids will, people and adults are very adaptive. They're very complex, but they're very good at overcoming challenges. And realistically, you have to give people challenges in their lives in order to grow. But if you don't, if you end up creating a world or an environment where it's way too safe, it's way like there's no challenges, there's no things to overcome, there's no things to do. It's way too safe. You end up really depriving your child the opportunity to see what they're capable of because they have no idea. And I think what's funny, we talked about the video games earlier. There's a whole community of people online called the speed running community,
Mm-hmm.
where basically they have forums and websites, and it is impressive on some level that they basically dedicate to trying to have like the fastest completion of a game possible compared to other people. And
Yeah.
there's actually been events where they'll have these people like compete publicly and they raise money for charity and things like that. But it does make me kind of wonder, like, is this that same? It's mostly men, it's mostly young guys too. It's not like there are a couple of women there, but majority of it is young men. Like, is it that same young male energy that would have been put towards like conquering themselves and building, like working out and taking care of yourself and doing this and that's being funneled in the wrong direction? But at the same time, like a lot of people, a lot of kids or a lot of young, man child, because they are nowadays, that they are what they are partly because they're succumbing to their own lower impulsive instincts, but also because the people around them are not pushing them.
If you're a kid and every time you go to your school and you're trying to be competitive because that's what you do when you're a kid, it's fun, right? The competitiveness. You get everyone gets a trophy type of mentality in school where you can't even win. Then
Yeah,
then you get home and you open up your computer and now you have a game where not everyone gets a trophy. And in order for you to even finish a level, in order for you to finish a level, you have to be good enough. And there's failure involved. And then you get attached to that because that's real life. That's what you're craving to have. Not everyone gets a trophy type of thing. That's not interesting to you. Video games are way more interested in this regard. I can totally see it.
yeah. What's interesting with like neurology and whatnot is that, for example, like dopamine is basically what this is all kind of pulling on. Is that because you can become resistant, tolerant to dopamine, to your own dopamine. Like you're not supposed to, like it gets boring. If you go to a casino and you do nothing but win, eventually you get bored of it. You wouldn't care anymore.
Yeah.
Fun is in the
Or if
uncertainty.
everyone else wins around you as well. Imagine going to a casino where each time you play, everyone wins in the casino. So everyone
Yeah.
gets, I don't know, like $1 or something. Imagine playing Monopoly, and then as someone gets further along than someone else, we have to redistribute it every single time.
Yeah. Yeah. And in that capacity, it's dangerous because dopamine circuitry is really geared towards unexpected within a certain range that, like, I think you've heard of it, basically where like your body, your brain likes it when it's like you add a bit of randomness to how consistently you get that reward. Your brain goes nuts for that. I love that. Dopamine loves that. And that's especially what's happening with video games nowadays, especially with things like loot boxes and kind of like any kind of gambling essential. A lot of games now will say like, "Oh, do you want this cool character skin or this color shade thing? Well, you have to pay $5 for this box. It has a random chance of getting what you want." Everything's been so precisely designed and like iterated on that it hits like that emotional, like that. It's like pulling a lever on the slot machine, in such a way that it just keeps you just constantly thinking about it and constantly wanting it, and not realizing they're hijacking your limbic system in a productive way, but it's again pulling you away from other productive things you could be doing in your life. And I don't necessarily blame the people who like partly to blame people who are stuck into these video games and stuck into bad addictions and behaviors. But also, if you have people around you that see it happening and they don't say anything, they don't really push you in the right direction. Like even in my case, like my mother, when I was a kid, when I was younger, I was like really, really into like World of Warcraft, as a lot of people were. And at the same time, my mother would just be like, I remember her saying like, well, he's not going out and like doing things, but at least I know he's here and he's safe. But then this ties back into this point of like, like, yeah, you don't, in a funny way, you don't want your kids to be around safety all the time. Like you kind of have to have a little bit of a risk-taking appetite in your life, or otherwise nothing's going to happen. Nothing's really not going to really grow. You're not going to like run and scrape your knees once in a while and see what you're capable of.
I mean, the good mother necessarily fails. That's what it says.
Yes. Yeah. Voluntarily, the thing like a Jordan Peterson thing, they voluntarily sacrifice your child to the world and like see who they come back as. Otherwise, if you,
those are and those are sins of omission. Like, and I understand it's really comfortable for a lot of mothers to see their kids going off the rails and then they don't say anything. But essentially, that is lying. That is deceiving your child. You know, it's kind of like a very, very, very minor child abuse. Not big, but it is up there. I think every single time you lie to your kid, you are, it is up the ladder.
Yeah. And even in the capacity of competition and play, which is really, I thought this was really fascinating, was learning about like how with competition and play, and this ties into maybe what we were talking about earlier with, you know, like how do you create these new environments and cultures and circles, is how the best way to play with something essentially is to be challenging something that's within your skill range, but just a little bit outside of it.
Yes.
And so, like, when it comes to things like play, for example, there's just studies that were done, I've heard about, again, Jordan Peterson, again, talking about with mice and rats, how when you set a really big rat, you put it with a tiny mouse, when they're little, when they're pups, and you let them play, they'll end up wrestling with each other. If the big rat didn't let the little rat win at least like 20 to 30% of the time, the little rat would just completely stop playing, would just give up. And I think there's something even to the point of like video games or whatnot, where it's like you'll find the games that you enjoy, you'll find it, or the tasks or things in life that you can kind of compete in. But ideally, you want to stay within a range that's prevalent to like what your skill range is, but just outside of it, you can try to push yourself a little bit. But nowadays, people really they don't realize how much they're keeping themselves stuck into certain circumstances and situations that just reinforce what they're already comfortable with, rather than saying like, I could do this much, and I could try to push 10% more. And maybe in the context of like socializing, it might be something like, I usually go out, if I go out to like, meet new people, I usually meet one person a night. I'm going to try for 2. That's pushing me out of my comfort range a little bit and seeing what I'm capable of doing. And like just like taking like small step, but also not beating yourself up for taking those small steps in the first place. Like whatever progress can be better progress than nothing at all, and just constantly reinforcing and reminding yourself that any progress is good progress as long as you're making some progress, and also voluntarily accepting the possibility that you're going to make mistakes, you're going to fail, and it's okay.
Yeah. Well, they say that the optimal learning ratio is like 85 to 15. So the optimum next task for you is going to be the one where you're pretty much succeeding 85% of the time, and then 15% of the time you're failing, because that's the part that is too tough. And I just remembered, I want to go back to something that you said about like unexpected reward, like this element of surprise. This is something that dating coaches also teach. So, I mean, it's a very toxic strategy, but it's, not every single time that the person you want to attract reaches out to you do you actually reply. Like, you reply unexpectedly. So just randomly. Sometimes you don't, sometimes you do, and it works wonders. And I see why. It's very unhealthy. It's not going to give you the person that you want. It's going to give you a person who has a very unhealthy attachment style, but nevertheless, it's going to give you a person. So I can see how that works, yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting in the dating coach thing is how it became this solution to the problems that we created by breaking up traditional models of structure in society and whatnot. And even the dating coach thing, like the dating coach is like if you say your journey from top to bottom is like you're a small child and you learn how to be a small child integrated into a small family, and then within the family you become a young adult, and then become a young adult turns into a full-blown adult, which turns into a person that has to go out for court somebody, the whole process of learning how to court a woman, or if you're a man going through a girl or going through a guy, and then going into marriage, and like every step of the way has now been like almost commoditized in a way. Like it's been like there's a business somewhere out there for every step of things that used to just happen naturally in society. So now it's like, well, first off, you need a dating coach. Cool, I got a dating coach. Oh, I actually met somebody, we like each other. Well, how do we say about? Well, now I need a relationship coach. Okay, I got a relationship coach, and it's even having relationship. Like, we're gonna get married. Well, now you need a marriage coach and marriage counseling. Okay, well, we're having problems in the marriage. What do we do? Well, now we need to go to therapy and talk about how. And it's like, how the hell did we get along with the species without having every single part of the way commoditized along the way? Just a problem. Whereas like before, this is where I come to the point of saying like we broke things that worked by themselves naturally, and now we're like learning how they work and then trying to find solutions to the things that we broke, rather than kind of go back and say like, it was working before, why don't we just try to like figure out how to some degree retract that in a certain way? But I think one thing that's really difficult for people to hold on to grasp and to acknowledge and be honest about is the fact that like, and this is a thought that I've had recently, is like, I don't think in the context of if the ultimate goal of life is like, like find a productive purpose in your community, your society, that is something of productive value while being in a long-term monogamous relationship, while rearing quality children that will turn into adults that will then repeat the process. I don't know that there's enough time in the day for two parents to have full-time careers and raise their kids. And it becomes a little bit like because like there is a certain, I think what we've done today in the world essentially is, I refer to this as like productivity creep, where basically we're trying to squeeze out every drop of productivity from every human being possible. But, and you want like take what you want and pay the price. Like there's a price to be paid somewhere, even if you don't see it. And a good example of this I came across was like going food shopping. Like nowadays I go food shopping myself. Like it was like twice, 3 times a week. I try to get fresh food as often as I can. And I was thinking about this when like a lot of supermarkets have like Instacart now, where it's like you can go online, you press a button and you show up and it's already packed for you, and then you just take it and leave. And what does that do? Well, you save time. Cool. What are you giving up in the process of doing that? Well, like you're not walking around. You're not having the time to just like slow down and just like kind of check out the new products and things you've done before. If you want to pick your own fruits and vegetables and the quality of it, if you shop locally at a local supermarket with people in the community that you are familiar with, shop there, you might bump into somebody, have a nice conversation. You haven't seen them in a while. Catch up a little bit.
Yeah.
If you have small kids, the kids are getting the opportunity to practice socializing and behaving in public. But now all of that is completely gone because you pressed a button online and all of a sudden the food shows up to your door in a second. So what are you giving up? You're giving up a lot. The kids are not socializing. You're not socializing. You're not walking around as much. And you're gaining back time to do what? Probably just go home and watch Netflix. Or do some kind of nonsense.
Yeah, it's like that with everything. I think that the lack of holistic approach produces a lot of bullshit jobs.
Yeah. Like what kind of jobs?
I mean, if we had a holistic approach to life, so let's say you work on yourself, you work on speaking the truth, you work on building integrity, and I think that having integrity is the best confidence builder ever, as far as dating goes, then you wouldn't necessarily need to have a marriage counselor and then a dating coach and then a relationship coach and then a therapist for you. It would be just one thing. Okay, you fixed yourself. Now just by being truthful to your partner, you guys can work out a lot of things that you don't need a dating coach now. And I think this is something that, well, this is why I like psychedelics as well. When it comes to psychedelics, you can have your intention in mind, right? So the set and the setting, and you can say, okay, well, I'm going to have this trip, and then I really want to realize if what I'm doing in my career is the right thing for me. Like, show me psychedelics, and you're all spiritual and all that. And then this is something that happened to me. And then you take psychedelics, and then it turns out that that's not what you're going to focus on, because I guess it's not in your control. Actually, what you need to focus on is being kind to yourself, right? So having that trip is sort of like it lets go of whatever you want to focus on, and then it shows you what you should be focusing on. So it forces you into a holistic approach to your problem. So I think we need more of that. And I'm not like suggesting that we should all take psychedelics at the same time, but I'm just saying that what we need is a holistic approach with just everything, and which is a lot harder.
It is, and part of it is also having to like I think one thing historically we did as a society, as a group, as whatever you want to say it was, is that we recognized that your time in the world is not permanent. It's temporary. You're kind of like passing through in a way. And when you go about creating the best life that you can, and then go about having like a family and kids, like your kids are now the ultimate focus. They're now your ego. Your ego is no longer about you. It's making sure that they succeed as humanly possible, so they can, so essentially like your portion of the DNA that you put out into the world there continues to survive and thrive. And I think in today's world too, when I was talking about like the productivity creep, it's like when I said it's not time to raise your kids and have a full-time career, is because we've been trying to find ways to optimize processes. Like now we have instant global communication. Now we have Amazon can deliver a product to my house in less time than it would take me to go to the store and look for it. And I'm saving time here, saving time there, so I can keep working and doing more stuff. But one thing that you really can't, at least as far as I know for the time being, you can't substitute is time with young children, young adults, to get them to turn into functioning adults. And when you try to outsource that, like the way you're outsourcing Instacart, or you're outsourcing, different tasks, and like, delivering stuff to your house, that's where you get things like daycare. But then even with daycare now, especially in any kind of like child rearing, things like that in the United States or in other parts of the world, that you get these kids who are like, there's a research study that came out talking about how like daycare, it's like a 15 or 20 year study, I have to see if I can find it. It was talking about how like daycare has a much higher percentage of children being raised with like anxiety disorders than kids who are raised by their parents at home. Because generally speaking, it's like I think people look at babies and things like that, especially in today's modern day age. They look at like, like young children that's just like these empty vessels that just need to survive until 2-3 years old. And then they start becoming people around that time. But even at that age, there's this really interesting thing where it talks about like the baby naturally throughout the day, naturally cycle cortisol levels. And part of that is basically, it's almost like it's a check just to make sure you're still being taken care of. There are people still around that care about you. So what happens in like young babies, other things like they can't communicate. They can't say, I need to use the bathroom. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, and it's crankies and it hurts. They just cry. And one of the things that you do is that your cortisol levels will naturally rise, will cause stress and anxiety feeling in your system to start to build up. And that will eventually cause you to start to want to respond to it. If you're a full-blown adult, then you feel anxious and stressed. Generally speaking, you might be able to look around and say like, okay, why do I feel anxious and stressed? Is something going on? Am I hungry? Am I thirsty? Am I tired? Am I stressed out or something? What could it be? Babies have no idea. And one of the easiest ways to reduce stress is literally physical contact. It's like a hug. It's hysterical how many people, this is what I talked about with massage, is that I've had a couple times now, and I've kind of like, I've managed to cull it out of my practice completely. But I have had people, mostly men, contact me and be like, so do you do extra stuff? I'm like, no, it's not one of those practices. Nope, not one of those places. Holy crap. But at the same time, I told people that people have contacted me with that. And I'm like, oh my God, it's disgusting. It's horrible. It's wrong. It's messed up. And I always make a tell them, like, I don't blame these guys for doing that, because it's like, just because your refrigerator is empty doesn't mean you're not hungry. Just because you don't have people around doesn't mean you don't still have those impulses and feelings. And a lot of times these guys are either they're single and they never managed to like get a girlfriend or a wife or a long-term spouse and they don't know how to, or they're in long-term relationships and there's just no intimacy, not sex necessarily. That's like, like anybody can just pay for sex at like a random, like, like prostitute spa, whatever it may be. But like actual intimacy where another human being is demonstrating to you, like, I see you, I care about you.
I care. You.
And like massage is amazing, that ability to like essentially calm down the nervous system by basically with physical contact. When babies are born, the first thing they do is put them on the mother's chest. And like that skin to skin contact literally calms down, like it super calms down the baby. The mother gets to bond. There's a ton of oxytocin flowing. It's a bonding experience. And I've actually had patients. I remember I had one woman who she has like 3 kids, and she's still like, the kids are like the twins are like 24, 25 years old. And she mentioned, I remember she said specifically, like, it's been like 25 years and I still distinctly remember the day when they were born and they didn't just give them to me immediately. They were fine. The girls were fine. But like, I remember they took them away, like clean them up and do all this stuff for like 20, 30 minutes. And that 20, 30 minutes was absolute hell. And I never forgot it.
Yeah. And bet you the babies didn't forget it either.
Maybe, possibly, yeah. But I think people have this impression, like I said, people have this impression that babies are just these empty vessels that can just be done whatever to. So when you put them in like daycare at a very, very young age, you get like one daycare worker working with like 4 or 5 kids at a time, which means they're not getting the attention that they need. And there's actually, this is a study that happened, it was a tragedy that happened years ago. I think it was in Russia during the Cold War. There was this case study about like an orphanage somewhere in Russia. It might have been even Ukraine. I forget exactly where it was. That they had an orphanage where they tried to like consolidate all the orphan babies, like as many as they could. If somebody had an unwanted child, they would literally just like leave them in an orphanage. And what they found within like 6 months, I think like 80 to 90% of the kids, even though they had food, they had clothing that was clean, they had like, nutrients that they need. I think like something like 80% of the kids died because they weren't getting enough physical contact, because there weren't enough workers that physically hold them. Literally just walk around and hold them and talk to them. And that physical contact is so freaking important. And that's something that you can't outsource the way you could food shopping. You can outsource food shopping, you can outsource delivery, you can outsource, this and that, but you can't outsource human contact. You can't outsource the need to like actually have a human being that sees you, that's acknowledging you, that cares about you. Like physical contact, you can't hug yourself. That doesn't work. Your body knows the difference. It's not stupid. It's like when someone who's like you genuinely, like one of your parents comes to you and says like, I'm so happy to see you, gives you a hug, your whole body just calms down a little. And what we try to do is try to emulate that through like Prozac or through SSRIs and things like that. But in reality, it's like, this is part of one of those things that it's dangerous to think that we can keep outsourcing everything in modern society and not have repercussions somewhere down the road. And I think what you're seeing now, a lot of cases of anxiety disorders and depression and stress and like toxic home lives and whatnot. And it's like, I have a friend of mine, she's an EMT, an emergency medical transport tech, basically. And she works like ambulances and things like that. And she works in a very, very, very affluent area. And she said like the majority of people that call in are teenagers overdosing on prescription drugs. And it's more often than not because the teenagers are because the parents are so wealthy, but they're working their asses off. And the parents are there just like, they're working like 50, 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Every week they spend no time with their kids. These kids had more, like everything they could ever want materially, and they have no love, and they hate their lives. They're miserable beyond belief.
Which is even worse because, I mean, I think you're in a better position if you don't have everything you want. Because if you're broke, then at least you can strive for something. But let's say, so then at least you can kind of predict why you're miserable. At least you have a reason. But let's say you have everything and you're still miserable. Man, that must be hell.
Yeah, I think it's like the worst thing, worse than having nothing. It's something like the only thing worse than having nothing is having everything you want.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because it cuts out. People don't realize it's the journey. It's the journey that you enjoy, not the actual process. Even in like today's day and age, where like people are trying to play for like status games and things like that, but say, "Oh, my career is this. I'm making this much money, and that's it." But I'm still unhappy, and I can't figure out why. I thought like having more money would make me happy. I thought having a new Lamborghini would make me happy. And it's amazing how like we've gotten to this point where I think in just modern society that we're just desperately trying to convince people that more stuff will make you happy. When in reality, it's like stuff makes you happy, but it's only one part of the equation. And the bigger picture is like you want stuff, but you also want social connections, and you want romantic connections, and you want like goals to strive for. And like when one like maybe you don't have any romantic connections right now, at least you have like stuff and like social connections. If you don't have any friends, maybe you have them romantic. Like even if these are at least you can appreciate stuff in the short term until you fix the other ones. These kind of keep you afloat, but they're not supposed to be dependent on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. If you found us informative, thought-provoking, or learned something new, please leave a review or a comment and tell a friend about the podcast. Feedback means the world to me, as I want to make this the best possible podcast that it can be, and to help others identify the causes of and solutions to problems in their own lives and villages. Until next time, let's keep working on rebuilding the village.